is the fourth meeting. I don't want to go another one. I mean, I don't know why we're at 4 already, but let's go.
Yeah.
All right, just give me 1 second, Mr. Herbert. We'll get it started. All right, you're good to go, Chair.
Okay. Good evening. Welcome to the Township of Hillsborough Board of Adjustment meeting for Wednesday, May 5th, 2021, which is being conducted virtually. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States and to the republic
for which it stands,
one nation,
under God,
indivisible, liberty,
and justice for all.
I did. That's it.
This meeting will be conducted virtually. All board members, consultants, and staff will be participating remotely. The public will be given an opportunity to participate remotely through the advertised Zoom link or optional phone numbers identified in the meeting notice, public meeting notice. The public should use the raise hand feature in Zoom or the *9 if participating by telephone to indicate you would like to be recognized to speak. Application documents are made available for inspection at the township website at least 10 calendar days prior to the scheduled meeting date in accordance with the meeting notice. Applicants and their professionals will be presenting remotely and will identify themselves before testifying. This meeting has been duly advertised according to Section 5 of the Open Public Meetings Act, Chapter 231, Public Law 1975, called the Sunshine Law. Notice of the 2021 annual meeting schedule has been provided to the officially designated newspapers, the Township Clerk, posted on the bulletin board of the Township Municipal Complex, and posted on the Township.
Here it is.
Additional notice has been provided to communicate that this meeting is being conducted according to the Governor's Executive Office orders and pursuant to Public Law 2020 C.11, which allows for meetings to be conducted electronically, and pursuant to the local finance notices recently established in the state of New Jersey. Roll call, please, Tina.
It's Mike tonight. Ms. Comfer is going to be absent. Mr. Vincher,
Yes, here.
Mr. Walmacher,
Here.
Mr. Valchek,
Yeah.
Ms. Salili,
Here.
Mr. Sirachi,
Here.
Mr. Stamler.
Here.
Vice Chair Haynes,
Here,
Chair Herbert,
Professionals.
Mr. Kinsler,
Yes, here.
Mr. Euro,
Here.
Mr. DeSessa,
Here.
Mr. Gorman,
Here.
Mr. Anderson.
I'm here.
Okay, so first on the agenda is consideration of resolutions, and we have one tonight. Kristen and Darnell Wallace filed BA 20-04. Board discussion on that? Any?
Motion to approve.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Okay, roll call please on that, Mike.
Mr. Vincher,
Yes.
Mr. Walmacher,
Yes.
Mr. Valchek,
Yes.
Ms. Salili,
Yes.
Mr. Stamler,
Yes.
Vice Chair Haynes,
yes,
Chair Herbert.
Next is a Board of Adjustment business. We have one item.
Excuse me, Chairman. Could you just turn up your volume a little bit? We're losing you just a tad. I don't know if Mike was losing you as well. If you can just lean in a little bit, maybe towards your mic, that'd be great. Thank you.
Myself?
Yeah,
Yes,
I
yourself.
didn't hear your yes or your here, either one of those.
Yes, yeah, I felt the same way, Mike.
Is this better?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, if not, let me just adjust the volume on.
Turn your hearing aid down too.
I was playing with this before.
No, that's better, Frank. You're good. You can continue now. It's much better.
Okay, so next is Board of Adjustment business, subcommittee recommendations, and we have one for home occupation, certain home occupations. Everybody received my memo, hopefully, and we're recommending that a section of the township ordinance that allows certain home occupations be deleted. Is there any discussion or questions or comments from members of the board on that?
no, Frank, other than this has been sent by the whole board for the last, at least for last year, and I think the year before. asking the township committee just to review this ordinance. And that's all we're doing tonight, is asking the township committee to review this ordinance.
Well, I think we're asking them to eliminate Part A, which.
Well, yes, that's our recommendation, but
We're asking, we're not moving, right, Frank, we're just recommending to the committee. That's all we're doing. We met with the two Davids and they're full agreement. So that's all we're doing is recommending, and that's what we're gonna just yay or nay on.
Right, so is any more discussion, questions from members of the board on this? If not, I'm gonna ask for a roll call since we're on a Zoom call on it. So.
wait, we need a motion, Frank.
Okay, yeah, okay. Give me a motion.
Motion to approve the recommendation.
Second.
Okay, see, John's moving me along, okay? So have a roll call.
Mr. Woolmacher,
Yes.
Mr. Valchek,
Yes.
Ms. Silili,
Yes.
Mr. Sirachi,
Yes.
Mr. Stamler,
Yes.
Vice Chair Haynes,
Yes.
Chair Herbert.
Yes. Okay, I'm gonna move McDonald's up for discussion right now, and I'm gonna ask Mark Anderson, our attorney, to discuss what he saw today in the notice.
Frank, excuse me, Chairman, do you want to open to the public for new business? Not on the agenda?
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah. Okay, so is there anybody that has questions for the board or may want to have comments to the board about anything that's not on the agenda tonight?
Again, please raise your hand if you do, again, for matters not on the agenda. Okay, Chairman, I see none, so you can proceed. Sorry about that. Thank you.
Fred, there was a couple of phone numbers on there too. Maybe just provide instructions of how to unmute if you're on the phone.
Yeah, to raise your hand, it's *9 or *6 on the phones. If anybody on the phone, we know one of them, but the other two. So I
Thanks,
still
Fred.
see none, Chairman. So I think you can proceed with Mr. Anderson and the McDonald's as you stated.
Okay, thanks for bringing that to my attention.
No problem.
Okay, so Mark, let us know what you saw today and what's going on with the notice.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, the chairman is aware of this. Let me give you the bottom line first and then a little bit of background. The bottom line is that I reviewed the notice. There is one required variance that is omitted from the notice, and it would have to be my advice to the board that the notice is not sufficient. By way of background, the notice was sent to me. I just looked at my email. Apparently it was sent out after 5 o'clock yesterday. I saw it today. I've confirmed with Mr. Gorman this afternoon that the planning department's memo is correct, that a lot depth variance from 206 is required. That variance is not in the notice. So again, my advice to the board is that the notice is not sufficient. Now, the good news, if there's any good news, and by the way, I did leave a message for Mr. Lippert, although I acknowledge that was left after 5 o'clock. So if he looks surprised, I'm certainly not suggesting that he was able to get it, but I called him as soon as I had confirmed all of this. In any event, the good news, if there is any, is it certainly seems unlikely that the McDonald's application would get very far this evening, even if it were able to be started. And as long as there is more than 10 days, at least 2 weeks as a practical matter between now and whenever this gets scheduled, the applicant, of course, will be in a position to renotice. I also discussed, or at least have advised the chairman of this. The notice is, in other respects, appears to meet what I would call the bare requirements of the municipal land use law. That is, it identifies variances, but it doesn't identify the extent of the variances. And I know the board is used to seeing notices that say, for example, variance for lot size, and would identify the lot size that's required in the zone and the lot size that's proposed. There is an undersized lot in the McDonald's application. Certainly, I acknowledge that's a pre-existing condition, but it is a variance issue. I believe that if the board thinks that a little bit more robust notice is in order, that it is within the board's prerogative to ask the applicant to do that. And obviously, I would assume that the applicant would comply with that.
We always follow your advice, Mark. Okay,
At least most of the time, Mr. Chairman.
So I know we wanted to get this back on the with a meeting on May 19th, but I was talking to Patrick offline. It looks like we don't have enough time for 10 days, business days, to get it noticed for the 19th. So we're probably looking at the June meeting. Okay, and
Today's the 5th. I'd like to try to use my best efforts to get it out in time for May 19th. My client is really under the gun schedule-wise, which is why we wanted to proceed tonight, even though we understood we might not get reached.
now the problem is, I guess, is that we require 10 business days. Is that right, Patrick?
No, it's 10.
They require 10 days for the notice. To schedule a special meeting, the board needs to give only 48 hours of notice. So the problem, if there is one, would be for the applicant to get their notice out, mailed and in the papers, but the board would have adequate time.
Well, you know, come May, Frank and Chicky, we didn't have a May 19th. Did we have May 19th scheduled?
No, we did not. So we're talking about scheduling a special meeting.
Well, that's what I'm, well, right. That's why, should we go to the 26th and see if board members can make it on the 26th?
I have a feeling, I know 2 or 3 or 4 of us are not gonna be away, so.
Okay.
Well, what about the 19th? If the applicant can do their notice, you know, immediately, can we do it on the 19th? What's their time of decision, Frank? Is that a problem?
That's the 21st. That would be a problem if we can't get it in by the 19th.
Well, maybe we should ask them to extend it now anyway.
Right. So why don't,
I'm happy to
We,
extend I'm happy to extend the time of decision.
Okay. And you can make the 19th? You can get your notices done?
I believe so. I will spend my day tomorrow doing that. My only concern is getting it in the paper, and I'm pretty sure we can do that. As far as revising the notices, to put a schedule of to add the missing variants and to put a schedule of what's required and what's proposed. I'll have time to do that. We can get them out by Friday in the mail, and that's still enough time.
Yeah, how about the newspaper?
I don't control that.
Mr. Lippert, I identified that one was missing. I do want to make sure you understand, I did not go further because of the time pressure and my need to advise the board, even for that one, that the notice was insufficient. I did not go down the entire list. I have nothing else to identify, but as I say, I didn't literally go down the whole list. Also, I believe this is the first time I've seen you in this board. I want you to know that I'm always happy to look at notices. I will do my best to turn it around immediately if you want to send it to me for review. It is, of course, ultimately the applicant's obligation to make sure everything's complete, but I always like to assist. It's obviously a burden on applicants. It's a burden on the board if we have to delay things because of notice issues.
If I can interject, please, it's Pat Gorman. I'm the board secretary and planner. The Courier News needs at least 3 business days to get something in. The deadline for the Beacon, I believe, is also passed at this point to get something in that paper.
Paper for what date? For
the 9th, if we're going for the 19th.
Okay, because the next Beacon that comes out on Thursday of next, is that right?
Well, I think I can short circuit this. Instead of being under all this time pressure now, I don't want to make a mistake. If we can get on for the June meeting, we'll have to go forward on that basis, if that's possible.
My recommendation is for right now for the June meeting is that we have 2, maybe a 3rd application on their homeowner applications. There should be time to put McDonald's on at that point for the June meeting. Of course, we'll need a time of decision extension at any point. If the board wishes to add at another meeting in June, we can also do it at this time to amend the calendar to do so.
Frank, I would suggest we add the second meeting in June. What's that date, Patrick?
23rd. It's the
23rd?
23rd. Yeah, let's add that meeting on. Let's look for June, do the 16th and 23rd, or I'm sorry, the 9th and the 23rd.
It'd be the second, no?
Oh, I'm sorry, first, yeah. I'm sorry, yeah.
Second and the 19th, right?
Mark, Drew, does that work for you?
Yes, I am available on the 23rd.
Not the 23rd.
Oh, wait, are we doing, right? I'm sorry, for June, the first and third Wednesday would be what, the second and the
16th.
16th?
The 16th, yeah, who's saying the
16th.
19th?
16th is
That was me.
also, I could also do the 16th.
Okay, okay. So why don't we do that?
Drew, are you good for the 16th of June for a second meeting possibly?
Yeah, that should be fine.
Okay. Mr. Lippert, any concerns up front for the second or June 16th?
Give me 1 second and I'll.
Sure.
tell
I'm
you.
sorry, I know it's on the fly.
Yeah.
While he's looking at that, Mr. Gorman, do you have a recommendation on how long the board should request an extension for time to decide?
I always extend a little bit further, especially in the virtual environment. How about we do it through July 31st?
That's fine.
All right, I'm sure Mr. Gorman will send you a form, Mr. Lippert, but just so that we have a clear record, we do have a recording, of course. My understanding is you're consenting to a time for decision July 31st.
Yes, I am consenting to an extension to July 31st.
Thank you.
And so the June 2nd or June 16th, either one. It's good.
We're gonna do both, right? Because I don't.
We're gonna need a
probably
motion.
need both.
We're gonna need a motion.
Yeah, but-
Meeting June 16th.
Yeah, but we're not ready for the motion yet, Frank. We're still discussing, right?
Right, but I'm saying I think we need two motions here when we get to it.
Okay. So, Mr. Rippert, you said the 2nd and 16th, you're fine with that for both meetings?
Correct.
Okay. So Frank, you're saying we need two motions for both meetings or like one motion to include both meetings?
I guess we need a motion for the second meeting. Okay.
Yeah, that's all. Make a motion to add a meeting on June 16th.
And also,
Second.
please just let me know which one.
Sure. So I have it as I have a schedule. We'll put them on initially for the June 2nd meeting. We'll get them started at that point, and then we can always go to the 16th at that point for additional work or any applications that we need to get caught up on.
All right, so I will notice for the 2nd and then we'll see how it goes.
I think that's a fair assumption. So the board's actions at this point would be electing to amend the calendar.
We just did it, Patrick.
We just did it. We seconded already, Patrick.
Can I finish, please? Thank you. Before you talk over me. So the board needs to make a motion to approve the amendment of the calendar, and at which point we'll elect them to put on the McDonald's application at that point, and for the extension.
So we had a motion for the 16th meeting. We had a second. Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so we have a second meeting. Do we need a motion to move to the McDonald's meeting to the June meeting, hearing to the June meeting with renotice, or was that done?
Well, the scheduling, since renotice will be required anyway, the scheduling can simply be done administratively.
Okay.
The board could direct it, but in the administrative, normal administrative system, Mr. Gorman has already indicated it would be June 2nd.
Okay, so we don't need a motion for that.
I don't believe you need a motion.
Okay, so we'll see.
I have a question, Patrick, for June 2nd. What do you have two applications?
Yeah, two, possibly three. The one may not have to be heard before the board at this point, but they're all homeowner applications.
Okay, well, sorry, that third application, that's a maybe, is not gonna be a maybe anymore. It's off. McDonald's is number 3.
It's going to be two. It's just going to be 2 or 3, John. We have a scheduling at this point.
Well, I'm telling you right now, you have 2 complete applications. Schedule them for the 2nd. You don't have a third, so we have, wait, let me finish, Patrick.
Sure
We
thing.
have McDonald's that's ready. We have McDonald's that's ready to go. So now you have 3 for June 2nd.
The 3 now are also complete. We already have them scheduled on. We already have them scheduled. One might not have to go because they actually might not require a board application at that point because they possibly fall under other state statutes.
This is Philomena, if I may speak. I think the point being that because McDonald's should have the June 2nd meeting as a given and proceed along those lines. The other 2 or the other 3.
Here are some results.
Sorry about that. The other 2 or the other 3, I think are obviously priorities, but we're moving McDonald's to the 2nd. Is that my understanding? The 2nd and the 16th. So they will be heard on that June 2nd date. Is that correct?
They can start their application on that date. Yes.
Okay.
So now, Patrick, do you have 2 completed applications or 3 scheduled for the 2nd?
I have 3 that we can schedule for that date, plus the McDonald's one.
Where are we putting the McDonald's one? What order?
We can discuss that order as we go.
I'd like to take this offline at this point. So, be it said, McDonald's will be heard on the 2nd. What point in the meeting we don't know yet, but it will be started on the 2nd at the very least.
Correct.
I just wanted to get clear what's scheduled for the 2nd. I heard 2, then now 3. So
Okay.
now we're gonna have 4.
It sounds like we're gonna have 4, and I think we're gonna McDonald's started that evening.
Maybe 3.
Okay. Discussion ended, please. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so we'll see you next month then, Mr. Lifford.
Thank you, thank you, members of the board. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your understanding as well.
Yeah.
Okay. So the next application is Nicholas and Deborah Petrock, file BA 2105. Patrick, would you introduce that, please?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Second application technically tonight is Nicholas and Deborah Petrock, file number BA 12-05, located at block 183.05, lot 11, otherwise known as 1246 Millstone River Road. The applicant seeking a C variance for relief from a maximum impervious coverage to construct an addition to the rear of the existing house on a property in the R residential zone, and also identified in the historic preservation element of the township as the James Elmendorf House. It's also in the National Register of Historic Places. Time of decision is 5/21/21. All yours, Mr. Chairman.
Frank,
Yes.
and Frank, before we start, I just want to make a comment. Is that okay?
Okay, go ahead.
We all received the package from the Petrocks. It's a good application, very well presented and documented. I'm sure everybody's read it. The only thing we're looking at is impervious surface of 0.6%. Correct. So I want the board members to know that, the application will probably want to go into a lot of detail because they might be hesitant on whether this is going to get approved or not, but 0.6% is pretty minimum. And I just want to let you know that hopefully everybody read the package because it's pretty slam dunk. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, John. Well, we do need to hear the testimony from the applicant.
Yes, I agree.
Mrs. Petrock, you need to unmute your video. If you muted your audio, but you need to.
Oh, the video.
Yeah.
Okay. Here we go. There we are.
How you folks doing? You guys are the Petrocks, right?
Good. Well,
No, I'm Al Boll, the attorney, the architect. I've listened
Okay.
to the attorney so long.
I'm Debbie Petrock.
And I'm
All
Nick
right.
Petrock.
So what
All
we're
right.
gonna do, okay, we're gonna swear in the applicants first, and they're gonna tell us what they're gonna do, and then they'll turn it over, I assume, to Mr. Ball, and he can
Okay.
give the details, okay? So, Mrs. Petrock, could you, okay, first of all, both of you gonna swear, testify tonight, or just you?
Yes.
Yes.
So, Mike, would you swear them in, please?
No problem. I'll do both of you Petrocks at the same time. If you could raise your right hands. Do you swear any testimony you give tonight is going to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
I do.
And then Mrs., then Mr., if you could, for the record, just state and spell your name, please.
Deborah Petrock, DEBORAH, PETROCK.
Nicholas Petrock, NICHOLAS, PETROCK.
Thank you.
Okay, so briefly tell us what you hoping to accomplish.
What are you can talk to them.
What was the question?
Okay, so what are you trying, what's your application all about? What do you want to do on your property?
Yeah, we're going to be redoing the kitchens, and we want to put an addition out the backside of the kitchen. And we just want to add a little more space because we have an old house here, and we're going to make the addition with lots of glass that overlooks the backyard. You know, in an old house, you don't have much glass, or and we're trying to make another space out there that, you know, we can enjoy and sit out there and right off the kitchen, and we can enjoy the backyard.
Okay,
Right
so
now.
basically you want to add on to your house, right?
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay, so at this point, I see that you have a professional witness that's
Yeah.
gonna.
Yes.
So why don't we hand it over to him?
Thank
Good.
you.
All right.
And Mr. Ball, swear you in. Do you swear any testimony you give tonight is going to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
And can you state and spell your name, please?
Alexander Boll, B as in boy, O-L.
Thank you.
Okay, and your qualifications?
I'm a registered architect and licensed professional planner in the
Okay,
state of New Jersey.
we can accept your qualifications. So go ahead and tell us what it's all about.
The house now has a kitchen that has no access to the yard. As you're probably aware, this house does not face the street. It's actually set back 60-some feet from the street and sits perpendicular to the street, so that the addition that we're putting on behind the house will be completely concealed from the street, because we're building into a niche that's there where there are two major portions of the house, a larger portion toward the front, toward the street, and then a smaller portion to the rear, and we're building in that niche behind there. The addition will allow us to improve the kitchen, gain a laundry room space, and have some family room space connected to the kitchen, which can then have access to the rear yard. Right now, the kitchen's only access to the rear yard is through the front of the house, and then you have to circulate around the house to get into the rear yard. Typically, a historic house like this has difficulties with attracting families to purchase them, because we do not have kitchens that meet today's standards, and certainly do not have a family room space that's associated with that kitchen. By doing this addition, which has been approved by the Historic Commission, we will improve those characteristics of the house and make it more readily desirable for a family living here.
And I see that they unanimously approved the construction during the meeting. That's the report I'm looking at right here from them. Is that right?
Historic Commission.
Yes, they unanimously approved that.
Yes, they did.
I don't see any gutters on there. You have gutters and the drainage off the roof is going to go right into the grass?
There's going to be gutters and leaders on the house. Yeah, definitely. There is now, and there will continue to be.
What about the addition? No gutters or gutters?
There will be gutters.
and
And you'll
drainage
meet
into-
any of the comments from our engineer? Will you agree to meet any of the requirements of the township engineer?
Yes, yes.
If there are, okay, thank you.
Matter of fact, Drew, you want to address this as the engineer?
Sure. Our comments really just identified that you have a minimal increase in impervious here. Right now, there's nothing shown to anything out of the ordinary for drainage. You'll have leaders and gutters. So I just wanted the applicant, if they want to clarify if anything else will be done with the roof leaders. If not, we don't have a real problem with the increase of impervious being so minimal. That's really what was asked for in our letter, was just to have an explanation of if there's any drainage other than the gutters being provided.
Okay, and I would point out what I really liked on their plans is all the zoning, a table with all the zoning information, including the variances that were needed and everything that was, we would normally ask for. So it was very good.
Thank you.
It doesn't list who's going to do all the cooking.
That'd be me.
Okay, any more questions from board members? Hearing none, do I hear a motion?
You want to open to the public?
Wait, do we
Public.
need questions from the public?
I'm just rushing ahead here, okay? Excuse me.
I'll open it to the public, Chairman. Anybody from the public have questions for these witnesses on this application? If you do, please raise your hand. If you're asked to talk, please state your name and address for the record, spelling your last name. Again, any questions for these witnesses on this application? Seeing none, Chairman, I think you can proceed to your motion now.
Okay,
Yep. Frank, I'd like to make a motion to approve this application with the minimum impervious 0.6%. It's a good application. It was a great package.
do I hear a second?
I second it.
Okay, so roll call, Mike.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Stamler, my understanding is the request is to go to 15.9%. That is your understanding in your motion?
No, it is not. Patrick?
I thought it was 0.6.
0.6.
15.6.
Okay, the reason I raised the question is the application itself says 15.9. So I just want to make sure we get the resolution correct for the applicant.
Actually, with my motion, I'll approve the 15.9 in my motion. So I motion to approve this for 15.9. And Chicky, you want a second?
I'll second that.
Mike,
Frank?
roll call.
Mr. Walmacher,
Yes.
Mr. Valchek,
Yes.
Ms. Salili,
Yes.
Mr. Shirachi,
Yes.
Mr. Stamler,
Yes.
Vice Chair Haynes,
Yes.
Chair Herbert.
Yes.
Bon appetit.
Thank you very much for your help.
Yes.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you.
What your house edition?
Ugh. Happy?
Yeah, moving on.
Everybody needs to mute themselves in this.
We appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Okay, good luck with it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so moving on. Next application, next and last this evening is the Harvested Gospel Center. This will be the fourth meeting for that application. And Patrick, would you just reintroduce that again?
Yeah, this is a continuation of the harvester's application since our last meeting back in April. I believe at that point, this is still for the house of worship and the conversion of the existing building on the site, along with other site improvements, including parking, landscaping, and lighting, etc. They're here for the D variances for the D3, plus additional bulk variances and waivers. At the last meeting, we actually finished up with the initial testimony from the applicant, at which point there's been subsequent documents received by the applicant to our department, which has been distributed to to our board engineer and our board members at that point. I'll let the applicants speak on behalf of what those improvements are and what they entail. And afterwards, after they give their discussion, then we just have to go back a little bit and open up things back up to the public for any of the professionals at that point. But I'll leave it to you, Mr. Chairman, to take the meeting.
Yeah, okay, so Mr. Ogrodnik, we left off, you had finished your testimony, but you really didn't. So you have you may have a couple of changes. So at this point, I presume you want to tell us what they are and have the additional witnesses.
Sure. So I intend to be as brief as possible tonight. At the last meeting, an issue was brought up regarding an accessory structure in a front yard. Subsequently, we met with the professionals, Mr. Stiers and our architect, Chris Howe, and we also looked at the ordinances, specifically ordinance section 188.3.4, which reads that, open quote, any accessory building attached to a principal building by a common wall, an abutting wall, or a roof shall be considered part of the principal building and shall adhere to the yard requirements for the principal building, close quote. So thereafter, and more than 10 days prior to tonight's application, we had submitted some amended plans, a site plan that Mr. Stiers will briefly go over, that will kind of walk us through where we were at the beginning of this application versus where we are now. We've also prepared some additional renderings from our architect, Chris Howe. And essentially what our amended plans show is a breezeway connecting the building. Because there was some issues raised by opposition counsel, as well as earlier planning review memorandums, initially this application proposed again, the D3 variances for the lot width, 195 feet versus 200 feet, and the impervious coverage, which were about less than 1% over, depending on the parking space width and length. By adding the breezeway, it eliminates the variance as confirmed in the planning memo dated April 29th for an accessory structure in the front yard. And it also puts to bed D1 use variances that were previously identified. No lot shall contain more than one principal building, no lot shall contain more than one principal use, and no building shall contain more than one principal use. So we've eliminated all the use variances. And with that, I would ask Mr. Stiers to just briefly go over kind of where this application started and where it ended up, where we are with Impervious, with the redesign of the parking area, the addition of the secondary fire access, the changes to the stormwater. And if the board wants any additional architecture testimony, we certainly have Chris Howe, our architect here, but I would just ask you to refer to the exhibits. The final exhibit that's on the website is a good rendering showing the breezeway, the construction of the breezeway. You also have technical drawings of that as well that were submitted. So unless there's any legal questions, I would ask Mr. Stiers to complete the site plan testimony. After that, I'm going to do a very brief closing, and we will close the applicant's case, but we would like to reserve our planner, Christine Nazaro-Cafone, for any rebuttal testimony if the opposition intends to submit an expert planner in opposition to the application.
Mr. Chairman, the one thing I would comment on, I think Mr. Ogrodnik's closing should be after the matter is complete.
Yeah, okay, I think we decided at the last meeting.
Very good, thank you.
This is Fred Kinsler, IT. Mr. Stiers, I gave you permission to share your screen, so when it's your time, I just wanted to make sure you know that. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Stiers is still on the road, so go ahead.
Mr. Stiers, you acknowledge you're still under oath in this matter?
Yes, thank you very much. As Mike said, I submitted the horizontal control plan 10 days prior to this meeting, as well as the updates of the architectural plans. The plan, can everybody see the screen right now with the horizontal control plan? Okay. So this is a plan that was submitted, since it was just really a minor change This was the only plan submitted at this point. If the application's approved, obviously, all the other sheets will be updated accordingly and submitted as post-approval compliance. But really, the only change, or two changes really, is the breezeway in this location right here. So you can see that there's a walkway that connects the proposed church to the existing, I guess it's the existing dwelling at this point, which will become the offices. We've shown the walkway with a covered roof that attaches the two buildings. And the other thing that we've done is eliminated the ADA ramp that was in this location. That'll be now moved inside the building so that the portion of the house right here is lower than the portion of the house in the main location. So there will be an ADA ramp inside that will get us to those two different elevations. So actually there's a net further reduction in the impervious coverage of approximately 152 square feet. So I think we're down to 15.8% now instead of 15.87. So we keep chipping away at that number and getting closer to the 15%. That was essentially the only change from the last meeting. And again, it was just to clarify or eliminate the potential of a accessory structure that was in the front yard. So now those two buildings are considered one, and we eliminate that variance.
Hey, Craig, it's John Stamler.
Yep.
We were at 15.87% impervious. What are we at now?
Give me 1 second. Not much different, let's say that.
Okay. So, all right. Because we're gonna need to know that at the very end or by the very end.
Yes, 15.8%.
Zero.
Oh, okay. Thank
Yeah,
you.
15.80, correct.
Thank you.
No problem. And that was really all the changes. I think we hit everything at the last meeting as far as the major updates. Like I said at the last meeting, all outside approvals are in hand. The only thing outstanding from the Canal Commission would be a resolution from the township to submit to them, and that would be their final condition. So other than that, we have DEP approval, we have county approval, Soil Conservation District approval. So, really the only thing pending at this point would be the decision from the township.
So refresh my memory, we agreed that there would be a fence along the west side property, so headlights wouldn't glare into the house next door.
That's correct, yes.
Where was that going to run from where to where?
I don't know if we officially, I would say anywhere along the where the cars would face. So from one end to the other in front of the parking, we can extend it maybe another, 15, 20 feet on either end, just in case.
Okay.
Mr. Stiers, I have a question that you answered at the last meeting. Can you move the map towards the southern end of the lot?
This way?
Yeah, okay. Now, when I asked you about the length of the conservation easement, now the conservation easement is actually a square U, correct?
The conservation easement follows this, this line right here, comes up along the back, and then back to the front, correct?
Okay, at one point you said that the conservation easement, and I was talking about the distance from the rear property line to the parallel line. You said 600 feet. That's not 600 feet.
Well, keep in mind, what you see here is only half the lot. There is a substantial, let me see if I can get the drawing up that has the whole map on it.
Okay, well, that was, I couldn't tell from even your map T what that distance was.
You know what? I think I have, okay. This was also a rendering of the other meetings, earlier meetings.
Okay.
So this is the aerial photograph with the project on it. So here's the easement line right here.
Okay.
Here's the rear property line. So
okay.
This is 600 feet, and you can see.
Okay, very good. Okay, great. I just wanted that clarified.
No problem. No problem.
Hey, Frank Herbert, it's John. It was agreed, and I haven't noted, the 4-foot stockade fence to screen the parking spaces, okay?
Yep.
And I have just one further question. Right where that hand is right now, so the cars swing around, there's no chance of headlights going through the vegetation and hitting the houses along the property lines, right? Without
I'm sorry, say that one more time.
In other words, as the cars are driving through the parking lot and they're turning around across the back,
Yep.
okay, there's no need for a fence across the back from headlights going to the south because of all the vegetation in the back. Is that right?
Yeah, like I said, that's 600 feet of trees right there. So I would say no.
And how about the house to the east, to the east?
Didn't we discuss this last, I thought this was all discussed.
I think primarily because the neighbor was speaking at the last meeting that we agreed to put a fence on this side. I don't know if there was any discussion on the east side, but you know, if
I just
again, and then the other thing was that this is a much more, although it's thinner, this is all evergreen, and it's a much thicker line of buffering. So I would say this is, you know, this would be, if you know, is substantial enough, whereas this has a more of a mix, which is consistent with the ordinance. So a fence on this side I could see be appropriate. Like I said, it's a little bit thicker on this side. So, and also there's no parking on this side.
okay. Any other questions for Mr. Stiers from members of?
Yeah, just one, and this is minor, but I noted that there's a 12-inch diameter hickory tree towards the southern end of the parking lot. Is there any that I guess is scheduled to be removed? Is there any way of saving that?
Is it outside the parking lot?
No, it's towards the end. Well, on one of the displays we've gotten on the you know, the one that outlined all the trees and their diameters and so on. So I'm not sure. It was a 12-inch diameter. It's not in the conservation easement. It was towards the edge of it.
I mean, if there's an area, let's just back up a little bit here. If there's an area in this, if it's in this area of trees or grading, you know, we can work around that. If it's obviously in a slope there, you know, we can do what we can. If it's not in the parking area, we can try and preserve it if we can. I'm not sure specifically where it is, so.
All right, and the other note, and this means, you know, again, it's kind of crazy, but in the DEP notice, I just wanted on the record that one of their special conditions is that there will be no tree clearing from April 1st through the end of September for environmental reasons, for a bat habitat and whatever other reasons. So just for the record, so that, you know, April 1st through the end of September, you don't do tree removal. Is that your understanding?
Yeah, I believe that's for the Ohio bat.
Indiana.
Indiana bat, I'm sorry. Midwest bat.
Yeah.
I don't know why they're here, but anyway.
Apparently they kill a lot of mosquitoes, but
yeah.
Mr. Stiers, could you just bring up the last exhibit that shows the rendering of the walkway rather than reintroducing our architect who I think went over the meat of it? I think it's the next. Yeah, the next.
This one right here?
No, it's a rendering.
Oops.
Shiki, it's Patrick. In the meantime, do you want any type of extra sheet or outline that shows the full length of a lot in the conservation easement? Would that help you? Would that help at the same time?
I think that this sheet has the whole length of the lot.
Yeah, we're
Also-
good, Patrick, on that.
Also, Mr. O'Gronick, I have that rendering I think you're looking for if Mr. Stiers doesn't, that you have submitted. So if you want me to share, I can do that.
Please, could you just throw that up real quick, just so the board can see the rendering?
Yep. I believe this is the one you're talking about.
That's correct. Thank you.
Yep.
This is the one where you change the blue house into a whitish house.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we wanted to match the colors for sure.
So you're going to address that in any way?
Yeah, I mean, the goal is to provide a color that would be consistent with, in both materials and colors. And I would just ask that that be subject to David Maskey's review and approval. But that's the intent, is to be, something similar to what you're seeing in the rendering.
Okay, so you're not going to have the architect testify to this change? Or?
If the board would like to hear from the architect, Mr. Howe.
Yeah, Frank, no, if we leave it up to David's
on, Frank.
approval, that's adequate.
I just don't want to hear an attorney testifying to something.
We'll leave it up to our officials.
Okay. Okay, no more questions from the board members, and I'll open it up to public questions for this witness.
Chairman, this is Matthew Mensch on behalf of the objectors. If it's okay with the chairman, I have a few questions for Mr. Stiers.
Go ahead.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Stiers, with regard to the breezeway that we were just looking at, was the did you add any impervious coverage with the walkway, or was the walkway already present there at the time?
The walkways was adjusted. It did connect to the from the church to the house at one point, but this configuration was adjusted to the other doorway to the east. And then also like I said, the ADA ramp on the west side that we had originally proposed has been eliminated.
Right. Okay. The could you actually throw up the exhibit you just had? I'm sorry, I don't know if that, Mr. Stiers, that was you, or if that was
Well, do you want the rendering?
Yes, please.
Okay.
The rendering that was just up. Okay. Mr. Stiers, I'm looking at the bottom left picture, which I think shows the side view of that. It sounds like a stupid question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. The covering for that walkway does not match the exact same height as the roof line of the church building, correct?
Of the church building?
Correct. Yep, right where the cursor is now.
I believe it goes over top of the foyer that is proposed.
Where it connects to the house looks like it kind of lays on top of the existing roof. Is that correct?
Yeah, it connects to the existing roof, correct.
And it's open air, correct? It's called, is it breezeway?
Yes.
Okay. And we can take that down for now, the exhibit. Mr. Stiers, you indicated, I think it was you, it could have been Mr. Gronick, but indicated that this was done to comply with ordinance 188-34 accessory buildings. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that building indicates that ordinance states any accessory building attached to a principal building by a common wall, an abutting wall, or a roof shall be considered part of the principal building and shall adhere to the yard requirements for the principal building. That's your understanding of that ordinance?
Yes.
With regard to, you testified earlier, if it's one principal building, then the worship services would be in the church portion of that building. And I think you said it was offices or meeting rooms in the, whatever you want to call it, the residence portion of the building. Is that correct?
Yes.
Sir, did you review the definition of roof in Hillsborough's ordinance 188-169?
No, I did not.
Okay. That definition, I'll read it to you, indicates that roof is defined as that element of a building which covers the top as the walls enclose the sides. The roof, perhaps more than any other tectonic element, defines a harmonious vernacular and should therefore be controlled for material slope and overhang. So are there walls associated with the breezeway?
No.
Sir, are you familiar with the definition of canopy contained in Hillsborough Ordinance 188-83.
No.
Definition of canopy in the Hillsborough Ordinance says a permanent roofed shelter projecting over a sidewalk, driveway, entry, window, or similar area, which shelter may be wholly supported by a building or may be wholly or partially supported by columns, poles, or braces extended from the ground. Sir, is this structure supported by columns, poles, or braces extending from the ground?
Yes.
Thank you. I have no further questions, Mr. Cyrus.
At this point, Fred, would you open up the line for the public? Members of the public are not represented by Mr. Mensch if they have any questions.
Sure. Again, any person from the public that wants to speak or has questions for these witnesses, please raise your hand. When you're called upon, please state your name and address for the record, spelling your last name. I see one. Mr. Cohen, can you please state your name, unmute yourself, state your name and address for the record, please, spelling your last name.
Cohen, 60 Oak Terrace. Thank you. Quick question, a discussion about the fences. I was curious, has that been defined as to what type of fence will be installed? If there is going to be one installed on that backside that you were just recently discussing?
I believe we agreed to a stockade fence.
Yeah, you're right, Craig. I wrote down stockade because that would provide the best blockage of any headlights.
And the material is not going to be vinyl?
No, it'd be wood.
Sounds good to me. Thank you, Chairman. Good luck.
And I think we specified 4 foot in height.
4 foot, yes.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank
It's
you.
very agreeable to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cohen. Anybody else from the public have comments or questions for these witnesses, please? Again, this is questions for these witnesses. Please. Oh, where'd you go, Shirley?
Shirley, you just.
She's raising her hand.
All right, hold on. I'm gonna have to promote her. Okay. Shirley, can you unmute yourself? State your name and address for the record, please. You're gonna have to unmute yourself, Shirley.
I'm Shirley Marlatt. I live at 480 Hillsborough Road for the past 58 years. Marlatt.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Go ahead, you can proceed to your questions for the witness.
What was I going to ask him? About the fence. Yeah. I just didn't realize that they were talking about a stockade fence, but stockade fences need an awful lot of maintenance. And I think they'd be better off with a vinyl fence, and I think they'd be better off if it was 6 feet high, because the cars are 4 feet high, and I wanted to not see the cars. So, Mr. Stiers?
I would say at this point, we would agree with whatever the board decides as for what would be appropriate. I think we talked at the last meeting would be 4 foot and stockade, but.
I don't remember stockade. I don't remember anybody mentioning stockade.
Hey, Shirley, it's John Stamler. How are you doing tonight? Hey, Shirley, yeah, we made it stockade and wood only because, you know, the vinyl fences, how they get that green mold all over them, and it looks really bad when all that green mold gets on those vinyl fences.
Excuse me, but we had a fence like that.
You lost her.
Shirley, we lost your audio. We lost your audio, please. We still do not have your audio, Shirley. I know you're speaking, but we can't hear you.
Huh?
Okay, go ahead. Try again now.
Talk louder. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we have you now. Thank you.
Okay. I don't know where you lost me, but anyway, I said a stockade fence doesn't look nice after 2 years because I've seen them before. And a vinyl fence looks good after, well, we had one there for 6 or 8 years. And all you have to do is power wash them once a year and they're good. So, and they're much more attractive in my backyard.
Testimony.
Okay, yeah.
The this needs to be placed on the record as testimony at the right time. Otherwise, the board is not in a position to consider it.
Right.
I apologize, then, but I thought that when I was registered or sworn in that I could do that. I'm sorry.
Yeah, when we get the public comment, so it's coming up soon, we'll get, have to tell us all about that. But if you have any more questions, Mr. Steyer is like,
No, you want to know about utilities?
easy to maintain vinyl versus stockade.
Utilities. Sewer line. That wouldn't be for him, would it? No.
Okay, so I think Shirley's finished.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, Bob Euro.
Go ahead, Bob.
Real quick with regards to the height of that fence on that westerly property line. I would recommend a minimum height of 6 feet. Based on the design, the grading plan that I'm looking at, the property line is approximately 4 feet lower than the elevation of the parking lot. So if the intent is to block any headlights, I would recommend a minimum 6 foot high fence.
Yeah, I was worried about that.
That's a good recommendation, Bob.
Thank you.
Yeah, and Bob, I think with the vinyl fences too, it comes in a beige color too, besides white, right? Beige might hide a little bit of the mold later on.
Yeah, I mean, the material would really, I leave it up to the board. I mean, there's pros and cons between the vinyl and or the stockade. You know, it really becomes an aesthetic issue, and you are correct. The vinyl does come in multiple colors. But again, I would leave that decision up to the board.
Yep. Okay. Thank you, Bob.
So 6 feet would be better, more likely to block the headlights, which is the thing we're trying to avoid.
That is correct.
Yep. I made note of that, Frank.
How about a board-on-board fence as opposed to stockade? It's kind of a hybrid between the two.
Yes, we have alternate.
Yeah.
The trouble with that is a lot of the headlight that we're trying to stop can get through the, this is a solid fence.
Board on board looks nice, but then you have the leakage of the lights going through. So, okay, thanks.
Ultimately, they're hard to maintain because if you try to wash them or stain them, you have to get inside them. So.
Yeah.
Okay. No more questions from members of the public. I guess you can close it, Fred.
Yeah, I see. Oh, wait a minute. Mr. Cohen would like to speak again.
Am I allowed to speak towards that discussion regarding the fence?
Is it a question? Is it a question for the witness? If not, you can comment at the end.
No, I just, a question for the witness regarding the fence. I apologize. COHEN 60 Oak Terrace. Just for background, when I was on the planning board, this was a very sore subject for me. And the note Hamilton's Boulevard, when we approved a housing development and they erected a white vinyl fence, I want to throw up every time I drive past it. I think if a quality wood fence, there's difference between a stockade fence and a high quality stockade fence.
Mr. Chairman, again, this appears to be in the nature of testimony. Mr. Cohen, the reason I mention this is the board is not entitled to consider testimony that is not at the right time and under oath. So your comment, I'm sure the board would like to listen to it, but if it isn't done in the right time in the right place, the board will not be entitled to consider it.
I apologize in that respect. I will put my hand down and
No problem. I'm sure the board understands that while it may be familiar with the procedure, it's not everybody in the public is necessarily familiar.
All right. You're okay, Stephen. No, you don't need an apology.
I see no other hands raised, Chairman, so I think you can proceed.
Okay, so at this point, we turn it back to Mr. Ogrodnik for.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I just have a quick question for Mr. Monarch to make sure something's clear for the record.
Go ahead.
Mr. Monarch, you quoted 2 ordinance sections. I didn't catch them because my computer was fading out a bit. Can you please repeat those ordinance sections about the roof and about one other object?
Yes, sir. The first one was ordinance 188-169.
Okay.
That was for a definition of roof. And the other one was 188-83, which was the definition of canopy.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Ogrodnik, any more to tell us?
No, we're closing at this time. Our testimony, we appreciate your time, and I understand Mr. Mensch may have a witness.
Okay, so at this point, the applicant's finished with his presentation. At this point, we open the floor for public comment. And since Mr. Mensch is representing many people in the neighborhood, we'll let him take the floor first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have two witnesses today. The first is Patty Kletz, who is the next door neighbor on the east side. I'm sorry, I always think about the directions of the images I'm looking at, but the opposite side of the resident who just spoke. So we have Ms. Kletz to speak, testify briefly about her observations on the property. And then we'll have professional testimony from Ken Nelson, who is our professional planner. Those are our two witnesses this evening.
Hey, Ms. Kletz, I just want to swear you in, okay? If you could raise your right hand. Do you swear any testimony you give tonight is going to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
And just for the record, could you state and spell your name, please?
Sure. Patty Kletz, Kletz. Patty is with an I, P-A-T-T-I.
Okay. Good evening, Ms. Kletz. Would you mind giving the board general benefit of your familiarity with the property in question and your relation to it?
Sure. I just want to start by thanking everyone on the call. I've been in these meetings since December, and I know how much time has gone into this, and I appreciate you listening to every side of this before you make a decision. This house, my husband and I have lived in Hillsborough our entire lives. This is the house my husband grew up in. He's turning 60 this year and I'm 53. So we have a long history in Hillsborough. His father built this house back in, oh gosh, I think 1965, 1964 he started it. So
Ms. Kletz, just to be sure the record is clear, when you say this house, you're not you're speaking about the property
Hillsborough
that you
Road.
own, which is next door. I want to make sure the
Yes,
board
500
understands.
Hillsborough Road. So, you know, my husband's parents have passed away, and when his mom passed in 2007, we bought the property to keep it in the family. It has a lot of sentimental value. My husband remembers his father digging the foundation, being on his lap while he was doing this. So it's something we always wanted to hold on to. So we've owned it since 2007, but it's been in the family since it was built back in 1965 when it was finished. Right now, it is a multi-dwelling house, so there's always been tenants, at least in one side when it wasn't family living there. I take care of the house. We've redone the house since we've had it, and there's been a water issue there as long as I can remember, and even further back with my husband there. You know, the more development that goes on in the area, you know, the more impervious surface, the water has less places to go. I had sent a picture. I don't know if we can show that picture.
See if I can, do I have permission to share my screen? Am I able to do that?
Is this something that was presented at least 10 days in advance?
You know, Mr. Anderson, I'll be honest with you, I don't recall. If I did, it was prior, but
It's probably 2 meetings ago, because it was.
Yeah,
December.
if I did, but I would be lying to you, Mr. Anderson, if I could specifically recall whether I did or not.
Mr. Gorman, do you have an answer to that question? I am concerned about the general requirements that things be submitted in advance.
I don't believe I've received anything from our office. I can double check the file, but I don't recall receiving any photographs from the objector.
Perhaps I can ask Mr. Ogrodnik, do you have any objection to this picture being presented? I suggest that it might be more efficient than having the witness try to testify in detail about what's in the picture. But beyond that, I leave it to you as to whether you have any objection.
I have no objection, Mr. Anderson. I would agree with you. That's not a problem.
Thank you, Mr. Ogrodnik.
Mr. Anderson, you then want me to allow him to share his screen? We're okay
Yes.
with that?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Mr. Mensch, you should be able to now share your screen.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. See if this works. And this is the only picture exhibit that we have.
We should mark this. Again, of course, we can't physically mark it in a remote meeting. But Mr. Mensch, if you have no objection to 01.
01 is fine. And it will be the only exhibit we use.
And Mr. Mensch, I would recommend, I don't know if Mr. Anderson would do the same. This is Fred Kinsler IT, that if you could email that to Patrick Gorman or the office, just so they have something to then mark.
Absolutely. That's not a problem at all.
I can confirm, I'm sorry, Mr. Mensch. I do not have his photo.
Okay.
Okay, so this is the view from behind my house. This is what's going to be where the church is. This is behind the house, between the house and the garage, me looking at 490. This is sitting water, and this is what I see a lot of the time. And I will say there's a water issue on this property. I think our water table here is really high because I have multiple sump pumps in my basement. And I replace them way too often because they run a lot. I had a foot of water in my basement on December 26th, the day I took this picture. I was over there all day, pumping water out of the basement, funneling it down my driveway because the sump pump stopped pumping. We have a water problem already. And this is just going to be exacerbated by raising the grade of this property by 2 feet and adding all that impervious surface, all shoved in the front of this property. I know it's been said that the water is just going to funnel down, but when there's more water like this, when you have snow and rain together, and we have crazy weather, it seems to be more and more frequent, but that water is just going to pour into the drain I don't know, what do we call it? A drainage ditch that we have on our property. And it's just going to make it worse.
Ms. Kletz, what we're looking at right here, just be clear, that's one of those buildings is what would be proposed to be demolished as part of the church building. And if you were to take this picture after the church was built, then what we'd be looking at would be hopefully some sort of tree line and then the church above the tree line.
The church would be above the tree line. Yeah, the parking lot is further down. And then, Shirley Marlat's property is where those trees are on the other side of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ms. Kletzer, can you tell the board, you've spoken about some of your experience with regard to water on the property. Can you tell the board your experience with regard to traffic on the property or around the property?
Yeah. You have to be very careful pulling in and out of our driveway. While pulling out, Hillsborough Road is a straightaway from before Willow Road, which is a mile towards 206 from our house. From before there, past my house, is a straightaway. And cars go very fast because to them, it's straight. It's also an incline as you come up that part of the road leading to these 3 properties. And so it's dangerous. It's I have to be very careful, and sometimes I have to wait a while because there's considerable traffic depending on the time of day. Another thing I worry about regarding the speed of the cars going by is how narrow the road is. Developments have gone in all around us, but no improvements were ever taken through these 3 properties. So I know they're going to widen it so that people can pull in before they pull in the church, but nothing else is being widened. We don't have storm sewers. We don't have sanitary sewers, and the road, there's no shoulder there. I don't know if there's a picture in the documents for this application, but the road widens right after my driveway and there's a sidewalk. And multiple times I'm there and I see people walking on the sidewalk up to my property. They start across my driveway and enter the road to walk the rest of the way. It's not safe. I've seen people bike riding. It's very narrow there. And we're just adding more traffic now with the church going in.
Ms. Kletz, a couple just a quick follow-up questions on what you just stated. One, would I be correct in stating that while your preference is that the application not be approved, if it were to be approved, that you would want the applicant to make improvements across the front of the 3 properties, whether it be road winding, sidewalks, et cetera, so that way if people are walking along the road or otherwise having traffic issues, that these improvements are not limited just to the very specific portion of the subject property, but address your property as well as the property on the other side.
Yeah, we've got a delicate system here. I have a septic system. So all the water that's generated from my house, it drains into my, my lateral fields in my front yard. Well, if we had sewers for stormwater and for, sanitary sewers for waste, then it's not sitting in my front yard. It's being moved away. And I think what's proposed is that this water is just going to run into this retention basin and cross the street and somehow be funneled away. But yeah, I think it would solve some of that problem. I don't think jamming all of this into a residential area makes sense. I don't. I'm not looking forward to looking at this big building when I'm over there in the backyard, grilling, having a bonfire. It's going to change the character of my property and the area. But, the water issues and the safety issues they're very concerning. And this whole process from beginning to now, all I've heard is all these modifications that it just seems to me like you're taking a square peg and trying to put it into a round hole by making all these modifications and adjustments to make this fit here, when I don't know that it does. But to put one more thing on the road that's not residential and not carry improvements through just doesn't make sense to me. I think it's a safety issue. And I think it can cause, additional water damage and stuff. I'm concerned. I have water problems already.
Mr. Anderson, just for the record, I'd like to note an objection on the basis of lack of foundation for a layperson as well as speculative. Mr. Mensch, is questioning this witness. She's giving what I think is expert a testimony as to traffic and stormwater management. So I just want to note my objection for the record as to that testimony.
Well, I know that.
Hold on, Ms. Kletz, hold on. And Liz, and for the record, we're not offering Ms. Kletz as an expert. I recognize that some of her testimony, let Ms. Kletz speak a little bit. I think the board understands that some of it was her opinion. We're here really to talk about the facts, which is to testify on the facts of what she's observed with regard to water, the facts which she observed with regard to her experience with traffic, as well as her specific concerns with regard to those items, the improvements and the impact on the other items. Whether or not Ms. Kletz is not being offered to comment on whether the drainage will in fact work or not work as proposed by the applicant, but I think the board can take note of the fact that she's concerned over it. She's a neighbor who's that is one of her concerns, and of course the board, I'm sure, will address that.
Mr. Chairman, the board has certainly heard Mr. Grodnick's objection, Mr. Mensch's comments on it. I think I can simply say that the board, I'm sure, understands the nature of the objection, why it's made, Mr. Mensch's response to that, and the board can deal with the testimony to the extent that it feels that it's appropriate.
I, for one, I've heard mostly fact testimony, which I will have a couple of questions on after she's finished.
Mr. Chairman, I'm done. I'll let Ms. Kletz. Is there anything that you'd like the board to know that you haven't mentioned already?
I apologize. It's emotional for me. This has been stressful every time I've sat here thinking, as we went through this. So I apologize if, I veered away from fact, but I can tell you every winter my mailboxes are taken out and need to be replaced because the road is so narrow, the plows take them out every year. Either I am bending the thing back into place and replacing one, I've called the township and they've replaced all of them. So that's a fact. I've called the other thing I have a concern about is the upkeep of the property. And it's just a concern I have hearing that there's a retention basin. There's now there's going to be a way for fire trucks to get through that needs to be plowed. The retention basin, from one of the meetings, someone said that it's got to be maintained. You know, you're talking about 25 people attending regular services. I go to church regularly and we're a small church and it's hard for us to make our budget and do everything. So once this is in, it needs to be maintained. So that's just another concern I have in terms of upkeep of this property, since I'm going to be right next to it. I do think that we can't be left in isolation in this section of the road without the improvements to make it, one, safe and handle the water appropriately. That's all I have.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Kletz. I have no further questions, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions, members of the board?
Frank, I have one that if I recall, these three lots, with the church being the middle one, their property line goes out to the existing street. So if that whole stretch, those three houses, well, the church is going to widen, they would have to give up a certain number of feet to the township before that part of the road could be widened. So, you know, if the owners of those other two houses want the road widened, I suppose they could talk to the township about giving up that, whatever the distance is. I don't know how many feet it would be for a road widening.
You know, Mrs. Kletz is not the only one to point this out. My wife does every time we pass the properties, because we don't live too far away. And I just almost hit a deer the other day coming out from your side of the property because it hides, you know, anything coming out there. But it raises legal questions, I guess. You'd have to be willing, both neighbors would have to be willing to give up their property. And then I don't know what legally this means.
Well, two owners, one to the west, one to the east.
Right. Yeah. What that means, who's going to pay for it, and how the township gets involved with parking. Can you address that? Or?
Well, certainly the starting point is the improvements that I understood that Ms. Kletz was suggesting would require, as Ms. Haynes has said, additional road widening easement. And the township, of course, if it chose to, could take that, but I think it's unlikely that the township would want to go to the expense. So as a practical matter, it probably would be, again, as Ms. Haynes had suggested, necessary for the property owners on both sides to be willing to deed over that additional right-of-way. Assuming the right-of-way issue was resolved, then you have the secondary question of who pays for it. The township could always pay for it if it chose to. Again, whether this would be a priority item and what I suspect is an already tight township budget, I can't speak to other than my suspicion that it's probably not going to be at the very top of the priority list. If the board concludes that this is necessary, if this is an off-site improvement, that is an improvement not on the applicant's property, that is necessary and is driven fully by this application, then the board could require the applicant to pay for it. Again, I would presume if the board took that step, it would also say if and only if the adjoining property owners were willing to give up the additional right-of-way.
Correct. Yeah. So that might be another condition. I'm assuming both of the other two lots are about 200 feet in width. They're about the same as the applicant's property.
Yeah, they're. How wide is ours? I think we're 200.
Yeah, it looks like it's about the same.
I would hope that with that improvement and widening, the sidewalk would also continue from where it ends right at my property. So people
that
can
could be a
walk it,
stipulation.
especially with a church. If people move into the area and want to attend this church, They might want to walk there if they live nearby.
That's a good point. Are you willing to give up that easement distance, whatever it would be?
Yeah, I would.
It's nothing but swamp now.
It's swamp, literally. It is. And usually I have to put all the mud back down when it's, because from the winter, from the plows displacing the grass, it's a mess. It's a swamp. It literally is a swamp. So yeah, you can have it.
So Shirley would be the other homeowner that would have to agree. Yeah, I don't think, by the way, this is going to help your mailbox in the wintertime. No matter how many lanes they have out there, they just knock them down. So
I don't know. Nobody else in my immediate area loses theirs.
They aim for yours.
I counted 10 back in January alone.
Mr. Chairman, just as the question of who would be willing to give up the right of way and who might not. Again, if the board concluded that this is an offsite improvement that's driven by this application, it could require the improvement if both property owners were willing to deed over, or the board could, in the alternative, require that the improvement be made on whichever properties the owners were willing to turn over. So I don't see it as necessarily all or nothing, again, within the board's discretion.
And it doesn't make sense to do two
It could be added to a motion.
Yeah,
But I
Chicky,
also
well,
think sewers are
why
important.
don't you work up the verbiage then? How's that, Chicky? I'll let you do the motion. You work up the verbiage, okay?
Okay, so I did have a couple of questions, Ms. Klutz. The picture you showed us, that was on the church property,
Yes.
property where the church is going to sit right now.
That's where the church is actually going to be. That's where the grade is going up and the church is going. That's not my property. That's their property.
Because you said behind your house and it's really to the side of you.
I was behind my house, so it's exactly where that church is going to be.
Gotcha. And right now, you said you're on a septic system, there's no public sewer. You don't have public sewer. Does public sewer run through that?
Yes, but not to us, not to Shirley, 490 or me.
Why is that?
I don't know. No improvements ever went through when all the developments went in. We were all just left isolated there like an island.
Mr. Chairman, as a matter of clarity, I don't mean to put Mr. Euro on the spot, but I suspect that he could give you, if not a precise number, at least a very close estimate of exactly what kind of right-of-way we would need, judging from the improvement already proposed by the church. I would assume that the town would want the right-of-way to line up and exactly the same improvements on the adjoining properties. Again, I hope that doesn't put you on the spot, Mr. Euro.
No, it doesn't, Mr. Anderson. Based on the site plan before us, the right-of-way, I'm just going to the one sheet, the right-of-way, the new right-of-way is situated approximately 40 feet off of the center line. And it looks like it appears to be an additional 25 feet, maybe 30 feet off of what the existing edge of pavement is. So, and Mr. Stiers could probably speak a little bit more to that, but so you'd be looking at a continuous right-of-way that's 40 foot from the existing center line of the roadway. And just to speak about the sanitary sewer, there is a sanitary sewer main on the opposite side of the road that that terminates or that ends just opposite our applicant's northwest corner of the property. So the current application is tying into the existing sanitary sewer on the opposite side of the roadway. And that sewer then runs in a westerly direction past, I guess it's Shirley's house is to the west. So that does run past that property to the west. It does not run to the property where Ms. Kleitz is currently occupies.
So Bob, how would they connect to that sewer line then? What's the most efficient way if they wanted to connect their property to that sewer line?
Who, Miss Kleitz?
Yes.
She would have to run a sewer lateral over 200 feet. Definitely would be go the entire length of the church property. So you're probably talking roughly 300 feet by the time it comes from the house.
Okay, so there's no way of merging hers with the churches?
No. And not knowing the grades, and, you know, she may end up installing some sort of an ejector pump in her house to push the sewer, you know, force the sewer to that existing line. So the Ms. Kleitz's property is a little bit more difficult to tie into. Shirley's property to the west is a little bit easier because the line does run across the front of her property technically.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I just have 2 points of clarification made to the board once the comments are done for this homeowner.
Okay, so I'll ask any more questions for the homeowner, this witness. Okay, hearing them, we need to open up for public questions for this witness. Fred?
Yep. Any people on from the public have questions for this witness? If you do, please raise your hand. I see none from the public. I don't know if Mr. Ogrodnik does, but nobody from the public, Chairman.
Okay, Mr. Ogrodnik, do you have any questions?
I have no questions.
So Patrick, did you want to?
Sure. Earlier, Mr. Mensch mentioned cited 2 ordinance sections related to the roof and the canopy. The definition about the roof is actually found in the architectural site design overlay zone standards. This site is not a part of that architectural site design overlay zone, or overlay, I should say. The other one about the canopy in section 188-83 is actually from our sign design standards ordinance. So I just wanted to bring that to the board's attention.
Mr. Mensch?
I have no further questions for this witness, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so you finished with the witness then?
Yes, sir.
Okay. We can move on to your next witness.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to call Ken Nelson, who's our professional planner. If the board bears with me, he's in my office. I'm going to just turn my computer around so you can see him. I'm going to be immediately off screen, but in order to not be sitting on top of him with the masks and the COVID and everything, if anybody objects to not seeing me, let me know and I'll try to get a second camera set up.
Mr. Mensch, thank you, because I couldn't find him on this call at all. So I'm
Yes, don't panic. We have him right here.
okay, great. Thank you.
I'm gonna flip this around and.
How's it going, Mr. Nelson? Let me just swear you in, all right?
Good evening.
Do you swear any testimony you give tonight is going to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
And for the record, could you state and spell your name, please?
Kenneth Nelson, Nelson.
Thank you.
And your qualifications?
Mr. Nelson, can you please give the board the benefit of your qualifications?
Yes, I'm a licensed planner in the state of New Jersey. I have been for several decades. I'm also a member of the American Institute of Certified Planners. I currently provide planning services to 3 municipalities and also testify before various planning boards and boards of adjustment.
We can accept your qualifications. We can accept your qualifications.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Nelson, do you have any experience specifically with houses of worship applications?
Yes, I've had quite a bit of experience on both sides of the table, but most of my experience has been as a municipal planner in dealing with houses of worship. In particular, I was the planning director for the town of Morristown for 20 years, and Morristown has many churches, and I dealt with most of them during my tenure there.
What have, can you give the board background on what you've reviewed in preparation for your testimony today?
Yes, I reviewed the application materials. I visited the site, although I did not enter the site. I viewed it from various locations adjacent to the site. I reviewed aerial photographs of the neighborhood. And I should also indicate that when I visited the site, I did visit the surrounding neighborhood. And of course, I reviewed the applicable parts of the Hillsborough planning and zoning documents relative to this application. Finally, I listened to much, but not all of the testimony that's been presented. I did listen to the planner's testimony, as well as the engineer on several occasions. So I'm well acquainted with the details of the application.
Mr. Nelson, we'll go into some detail on some of the elements of the application, but can you give the board an overview as to having listened to the application, reviewed the materials, what's your initial your overview of your impression of the application and the testimony offered by the applicant's planner?
Well, in terms of what I consider to be the key points of the application, let me just go through 5 or 6 of those quickly. And I might add that I know the board has listened to quite a bit of testimony. I'm going to try not to be repetitive. I think the board is well acquainted with a lot of the site details and characteristics, so I will avoid getting into a discussion about a lot of that information. But so I'm relying on a lot of the expert testimony that was previously given. But in terms of some of the key points relative to this application from a planning point of view, in my opinion, the applicant's planner would prefer the board to view this as a numbers game. And by that I mean that this application is a conditional use. It meets most of the conditions. It doesn't meet a couple of the conditions, and there are some waivers, but they're de minimis. So again, I don't want to, I'm paraphrasing, I think, what the applicant's planner testified to, but I think that's the applicant's position. And I should say that I've dealt with many conditional use applications, and I understand the argument that's often made from an applicant's point of view, that we were close to meeting this condition or we're close to meeting that condition. As a municipal planner, I've always looked at the broader picture and whether in the final analysis, even though a conditional use may be close to meeting some of the conditions, it's the overall impact, the overall situation that the conditional use might create, and whether it's an inappropriate intrusion into an area, even though the ordinance indicates that it's allowed as a conditional use. I would argue that this is an inappropriate intrusion into a homogeneous residential area. Now, if you're not going to adhere to the argument that this is just a numbers game, I think you have to look at what the ordinance talks about in terms of the process. And I know the board is very familiar with this section of the ordinance, but 188-9 under conditional use has almost a full page of what the board should be considering in dealing with the conditional use. And if I might, I would just like to read a couple sections from that page, which I think are directly related to this application. First, the board shall review the number of employees or users of the property, the requirements set forth in this chapter, the conditions, and shall give due consideration to all reasonable elements which would affect the public health, welfare, safety, comfort, and convenience, such as, but not limited to, the proposed use, the character of the area, vehicular travel patterns and access, pedestrian ways, landscaping, lighting, signs, drainage, sewage treatment, potable water supply, utilities, and structural locations and orientation. It goes on to say that each conditional use shall be considered as an individual case. In all requests for approval of conditional uses, the burden of proof shall be on the applicant. And I don't think the applicant has disagreed with the fact that the burden is on them, but that's something that, obviously needs to be emphasized. And then finally, prior to making its decision, the board shall be satisfied that the conditional use is reasonably necessary for the convenience of the public in the location proposed. So to me, that process is very important in connection with your deliberations. You have to look beyond just the numbers that have been presented. I would also quickly mention, and I don't want to get into a extended discussion about this, but we all know that the federal legislation, ARLUPA, as well as the concept of inherently beneficial uses, has some relationship to this application since it's a house of worship. But in my opinion and in my experience, the board can still use its judgment as to where a house of worship is not appropriate, as long as your judgment is not arbitrary and capricious. And I think there are enough concerns related to this application to defend against an argument that a denial of this application would be arbitrary and capricious. Next, I have to take exception to the applicant's planner indicating that this application advances certain purposes of zoning. I'll just focus on two of them that she mentioned: sufficient space in appropriate locations for a variety of land uses. In my opinion, which I'll get into later in some of the details, this is not an appropriate location for this particular use. And I would further state that Hillsborough is a pretty big community. The zoning ordinance allows houses of worship throughout much of the municipality, and that I'm sure there's sufficient space in appropriate locations in other parts of the township where this type of use can be accommodated and is accommodated. Also, the argument that this promotes a desirable visual environment. Well, I'm really not sure how to respond to that. I mean, yes, they're planting a few trees, and maybe you could argue that the building itself is not an ugly building, but in the context of this homogeneous residential area, I don't see how this application promotes a desirable visual environment. The other thing I just wanted to quickly mention is, and I preface my remark here with the understanding that all applications stand or fall on their own merits, and we can't project ahead to future applications. But my experience has been, when it comes to houses of worship, once they're established, once they're in a location, it gets very difficult to deny expansions. So, the board, I don't think, can directly take that into consideration, but I just raised that as a concern about the future expansion of this particular proposal. Lastly, I have to commend the engineer for dealing with a very difficult site, difficult in terms of what the applicant wants to put on it. I think the site design gymnastics that the engineers had to go through to accommodate what is proposed in a way is exemplary, but to me, it only serves to illustrate the fact that this site is inappropriate. Very quickly, we're well aware that this is a long and narrow site. It's part of a homogeneous residential area. And many of the homes in this area will be impacted, but in my opinion, looking at the neighborhood, visiting it, as I said, there's probably 8 or 10 homes that will be directly impacted. Homes that are located on Beverly or Duncan Court or Hillsborough Road. There's 8 or 10 of them that'll have a direct view of this complex. I was previously going to get into a discussion about the history of the neighborhood, but I think I'll not provide that testimony, except to say that looking at an aerial photograph and looking at how 2 of the streets butt in to the adjoining properties, it looks as if somebody expected this area to be completed residentially and not to have a non-residential use intruding into this area. The next thing that I'd like to get into, or several things I'd like to get into, are some of the deviations, waivers, variances. The lot width, of course, is deficient. The applicant would argue, well, it's only deficient by 5 feet. But I would, again, point out that the 200-foot minimum is a minimum. And that doesn't mean that, depending on the proposal, that the lot shouldn't be wider. And I think that's particularly true in this case. And the lack of lot width has a direct impact on the emergency access road that is now part of the application, on the substantial deficiency in the buffer, and a number of other issues related to the site design. With respect to the impervious cover, and this I consider to be really one of the most important issues related to this application. The applicant emphasizes that, oh, we're very close to the 15%. I think 15.8%, is what has been noted as where they are now. And that's true. However, the impervious cover is being concentrated into a relatively small portion of the site. I think 40% of the site is where the actual development is occurring. So when you measure the impervious coverage with respect to the developed part of the site, or the site of the site, the part of the site that is proposed to be developed, you then realize very quickly that the impervious coverage realistically, visually, is more like 30%. I haven't done an exact calculation, but I'm confident that it's in that range. So all of the open space being preserved behind it, I guess, is laudatory in a way, but it really distorts the true picture. And if this were a 2-acre lot, a subdivided 2-acre lot, and they were putting this proposal on it as we see it, then the coverage, the impervious coverage variance would have to be calculated at closer to 30% than to 15%. The detention basin is another factor that comes into play in terms of the visual impact, the potential that it may not be maintained as well as one would hope, and creates off-site improvements. This is something that you don't normally see on a residential lot. Certainly drainage basins, detention basins are often part of larger subdivisions and are incorporated into residential areas in an appropriate way. But this detention basin is basically squeezed in to the front portion of the property, the front portion of the part of the property that's to be developed, and creates a very unresidential type appearance as a result. The size and the shape of the building, again, I'm not going to say that it's not attractive. It's attractive in terms of what most non-residential buildings look like, but it's certainly not residential in appearance. It's substantially larger than any residence in the immediate area, as one would expect for this type of use. I'd also indicate that in terms of lighting, the applicant's engineer has gone to great lengths to prevent any glare on adjoining properties, but and I'll use what a planning term or a planner's term. Engineers talk about glare. Planners often talk about the glow from a parking lot. And yes, the lighting doesn't spill over into adjoining properties, but everybody knows that parking lot is there in the nighttime because of the glow that's visible from a great distance. I already mentioned the buffer deviation. To me, as I said, that's very substantial, 13 feet, I believe it is, instead of 30. And I would also suggest that in many ordinances that I'm familiar with, this type of requirement would actually be a variance, not a waiver, but be that as it may, in Hillsborough, it's considered a waiver. I also would, from a planning point of view, from an overall planning point of view, from a long-range planning point of view, I wonder about the future of the two adjoining lots. I don't know whether they'll be subject to some type of non-residential use. Having a house of worship sitting in between the two of those would give some future planner for an argument a great deal of ammunition to deal with. Or what might happen, I don't think there's anything that would prevent the applicant from acquiring one or both of those lots for future expansion. Again, it's something that I raise from a long-range planning point of view. I refer to this area as a homogeneous residential area. I am familiar with the fact that the school is located in this area. However, from my point of view, that land use has a direct community function. I'm not sure that this proposal has that same direct community function that the school does. Traffic and noise, I won't get into much about that. I'm not a traffic engineer, but certainly this use will generate noise. It will generate traffic that this residential area is not accustomed to. The last thing that I'd like to just mention, because I did mention it earlier as being laudatory, and that's the deed restriction or the conservation easement, however you want to describe it, that the applicant has agreed to. Well, again, based on my experience, the deed restrictions, conservation easements, however you want to describe them, aren't necessarily absolute. I've seen situations where deed restrictions are modified or eliminated depending on future conditions. So although I commend the applicant for agreeing to a conservation easement, I'm not sure that the board can be completely comfortable with that remaining as dedicated open space into the future. Just in concluding, it's my opinion that this application fails to meet the negative criteria test. The potential impacts associated with this application on the residential neighborhood far outweigh any benefits to the community. The township, as a reminder, and I guess I don't have to remind this board, The township does not prohibit houses of worship. There are some municipalities that do, and they get in trouble for that. So the township does not prohibit houses of worship, but it also recognizes, in my opinion, based on the review of your ordinances in the master plan, that some locations may not be appropriate for this type of use. If the township did not recognize that, then churches would have been allowed as a permitted use in this zone, as some municipalities do. But the township doesn't. It purposely set it up as a conditional use, set some conditions, but also included in the ordinance the process that the board needs to go through in evaluating those conditions and all other aspects of the application. So that concludes my testimony, and I'm available for any questions.
What I'm going to, well, everybody, what I'm going to do is the court report for about 2 hours, so I'm going to ask for a 10-minute break. That sound good, Mike? Okay, so everybody back here at 9:06, please. Okay, mute your video. And
Yeah, please mute yourselves for the break. Thank you.
everybody refreshed?
I think so, Mr. Chairman. I guess Mike should take a roll call as normal procedure.
Yep.
Just wait until I see everyone's face. Or at least they're unmuted. All right, Mr. Venture.
Here.
Mr. Walmacher.
Here.
Mr. Valchek.
Here.
Ms. Lilly.
Here.
Mr. Sirachi.
Here.
Mr. Sandler.
Here.
Vice Chair Haynes.
Here.
Chair Herbert.
Here.
And Mr. Kinsler.
Yep.
Mr. Euro.
Here.
Mr. Gorman.
I'm here.
Mr. Anderson.
Here.
So the first time everybody came back exactly on time. Something to be said for the Zoom meetings. Okay, so we left off with Mr. Nelson's testimony. At this point, it's time for questions from the board members, and then we'll open up to the public.
Mr. Chairman, I had just two very quick questions on an issue I think near and dear to Mr. Grodnick's heart and my own. Just want to ask a few very quick questions on issue of roof. Mr. Nelson, are you familiar with the new illustrated book of development definitions by Harvey Moskowitz and Carl Lindblom?
Yes, I am.
What is that book?
It's a book of development definitions prepared by two gentlemen who have had many decades of experience with planning issues in New Jersey.
Is that something widely used by planners and planning professionals in New Jersey?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Sir, I have the book in front of us. Can you read the definition of roof?
A roof is defined very simply as the outside top covering of a building.
And you saw the representation of the breezeway covering that was shown earlier this evening?
Yes.
And your opinion, is that the top covering of a building?
No, it's a canopy or breeze. It's the covering over a breezeway. It's not a building, in my opinion.
Okay, and that same book references, it refers to a figure and shows 6 types of roofs. Do you see that?
Yes.
Okay, do any of those roof types are roofs without walls?
No.
Okay. In general, is it important for applicants to comply with the architectural and design standards of a municipality?
That's been my experience, both as a municipal planner and otherwise.
Thank you. Okay, I have no further questions, Mr. Chairman. That concludes my direct examination of this witness.
Okay, thank you.
It's John Stamler. Hey, Frank, I have a question. It's John.
Go ahead, John.
Hey, Michael. The question's for Michael. Say in the future, Michael, that the two property owners adjacent or adjoining the applicant's property, say in the future, they both agreed to giving up their land for a highway expansion.
John, are you addressing that to the witness or?
No, I said Michael.
Michael who?
Grodnick.
I don't know if this is the right point to direct the
Oh, I
question.
thought, oh, okay, I'll hold off.
Right. Okay, any other questions from members of the board? Mark, do you have any questions?
I have no questions, Mr. Chairman.
Patrick?
Nothing at this time.
Okay, so at that point, we'll open it up for questions from the public, and we'll start with Mr. Grodnick since he's representing the applicant.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Would you agree that a house of worship is an inherently beneficial use?
Yes.
What's your definition of an inherently beneficial use?
Well, without referring to case law, it's a use that is generally considered to provide a community benefit of one kind or another.
Would you agree with the planner's memorandum dated April 29th that the only variance in this application as it currently is proposed is a D1 or is a D3 conditional use variance?
Yes.
And in your experience, is an increase in 0.80% of impervious coverage a substantial increase?
Well, think I explained the unique situation here. In technical terms, it's a small increase. In terms of its visual impact, it's not.
Have you done an analysis on block 2.03 and 203.10 with respect to how many lots have the width of 200 feet?
No.
Have you done a similar analysis on the impervious coverage averages for those two blocks relevant to this neighborhood?
Could you repeat that?
Have you done an analysis to look at all of the other lots in the adjoining area to see if they exceed the permitted impervious coverage of 15%?
All of the residential lots?
Yes.
No, I didn't do an analysis. I did a drive-through of the neighborhood and observed generally what the size of the houses were and the extent of their driveways, which would be most of the impervious cover. And it appeared to be a typical neighborhood with an impervious coverage range in the vicinity of 15%. But no, I did not do a detailed engineering analysis.
When you were driving in that neighborhood, did you see a lot of lots that had the width of 200 feet, or were they less than that?
I didn't make a judgment about those.
Had you reviewed Exhibit A12 that we had submitted in preparation for this meeting that demonstrates the impervious coverage calculations for block 2.03, 203.09 and 203.10?
I don't know if I saw that exhibit. Which exhibit 12 you said?
A12.
A12, that was from
the most recent submission.
We're trying to find it now.
Okay. Well, as the planner had testified, it was a calculation of impervious coverage. And I'm just going to ask if you have any reason to disagree with the data, the conclusions that our engineer and planner came up with that.
Oh, that exhibit, yes. Yes, thanks for reminding me. Yeah, looking at that exhibit and the percent coverage, some of them are higher than one would expect, but there's a range as I'm looking at it here. There's a range of from 11% to 18% on average, and then there's a couple of outliers at 22%, at 25%. So there are some residential lots in the neighborhood that have a higher impervious coverage than one would expect.
Would you disagree with any of the data that we had reached with respect to over 53% non-compliant lots within that neighborhood at 203.10 and 53.3 at the exact percentage?
Right, non-compliant, but in very close proximity to the 15% requirement. So yeah, I don't take any, I'm not in disagreement with the analysis that was done.
Okay, I have no questions.
I have a quick redirect, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Mr. Nelson, with regard to the data that you were just asked about by Mr. Ogrodnik, do you have any knowledge or recall whether there was any testimony on what the zoning was at the time that those lots were developed?
I don't recall testimony provided in connection with that issue.
Do you have any information on your own about what the zoning requirements were at the time any of those lots were developed?
No.
To your knowledge, are any of those lots conditional approved uses as opposed to just a permitted use?
I would assume that all of them are permitted uses that we're allowed today.
Sir, Mr. O'Gronick asked you before about Mr. Gorman's April 29th report, where Mr. Gorman indicated that there was a D3 variance. I'm reading right now from the report. A D3 conditional use variance is still required for not complying with the minimum lot width and the maximum impervious coverage requirements. Do you recall being asked about that statement?
Yes.
Okay, and this report discusses, preceding that comment states, now that the breezeway connects the two buildings, a bulk variance for having an accessory building use in the front yard is no longer needed pursuant to ordinance 188-34 as follows, and then it reads recites the ordinance talking about an accessory building being attached by a common wall. Remember that testimony from earlier?
Yes.
Okay. Sir, if the board were to find that the two buildings are not a principal building because of that it didn't comply with that ordinance, would there then be D1 use variances required for having two principal buildings?
Yes.
If the board were to find that it was in fact one building, could there still be a D1 variance needed for having two principal uses housed within one building, that being one of a church and one of a office/meeting room space?
That could be an interpretation, yes.
I have no further questions.
Mr. O'Gronick, if you have any questions?
So you had just testified that it's your expert opinion that if this house was used as an office and prayer and meeting rooms, that would be a second principal use on the lot?
It could be interpreted that way, depending on the nature of the office. And again, churches are given wide latitude. So yeah, you could conclude that it's an accessory use in that building, but you'd have to take a closer look at all of the details related to the operation of the use.
Which we testified to, that this was a small office and a prayer, I believe 2 prayer rooms. So I guess I'm asking you, what's your impression of whether the office and the prayer and meeting spaces are accessory to the church use?
Well, I think the only way I can answer that is, again, churches are given wide latitude. I know some churches house different community activities. I don't know if a community activity would be considered to be accessory to the church or not. So we're getting into a gray area here, which is really difficult to deal with tonight.
No question.
Okay, if there's no more questions, we'll open it up to public that's not represented by either one of these attorneys. Fred, with you.
Okay, so these are questions for this witness. Again, not comments. These are questions for the witness. So please state your name and address for the record, spelling your last name, please.
This is Lisa Elwood, ELWOOD, 35 Beverly Drive.
Thank you.
I had a question for Mr. Nelson regarding the buffer. The requirement is 30 feet and the current application shows 13 feet. From municipal planning points, how does that have an impact on light from the parking lot, light from the second story of the building, and noise from 6 air conditioning units on the neighboring properties? Does that buffer suffice?
Well, reducing the buffer by more than half is going to have an impact. The plant material that they've selected is an attempt to try and offset that impact, but there's still going to be an impact, and I believe that the ordinance requires that 30 feet for a reason when it comes to a house of worship or other non-residential type uses, because it's an attempt to try and protect the adjoining properties to the greatest extent possible. But I think municipal regulations also recognize that you can't completely protect adjoining properties from this type of use. But this is a substantial deviation from the 30 feet.
Thank you.
Anybody else in the public that have questions? Seeing
I
none?
see no other, Chairman.
Okay, so Mr. Meigs is finished with his witnesses. At this point, we'll open it up for public comment. This is what everybody's been waiting for, I think, that is not represented by Mr. Meigs. So, Fred, this is where Shirley can talk to us. And
Yep. Okay. So again, public, this is your time to speak. Public comments on this application. Again, it is 9:20, so we have a lot of people online. So just keep that in mind. Again, please state your name and address for the record, spelling your last name, please.
Mr. Chairman, if I may remind members of the public that in order to provide testimony at this point, public comments, they are required to be sworn, and they must appear by video by virtue of the DCA regulations. So got to be sworn and you got to get your video on.
Okay, so let's try again. Go ahead. Is it Sean Hemmings? Can you please state your name and address for the record, please?
Yes, Sean Hemmings, formerly of 490 Hillsborough Road. Current address is 53 Tomahawk Trail in Denville, New Jersey.
yeah, Mr. Hemmings, we don't see you on video.
Yeah, the camera is on, but I don't know why Zoom won't let it.
Mr. Chairman, let me suggest we move on to others and see if Mr. Hemmings can resolve that problem. Again, I can't give the board an explanation of why the DCA has imposed this rule on remote meetings, other than tell you that the DCA has. It's quite explicit that testimony must include video.
Excuse me, Mr. Anderson, is public comment considered testimony? They don't have to swear if they're just making comments, correct?
If they make comments, the board would not be entitled to consider any factual statements in their deliberations.
Mr. Herbert, what would you like to do? I see right at this time, no other hands raised, so. We can see if Mr. Hemmings just wants to, well, we do have another hand raised, so if we want to give him some time, we can do that as Mr. Anderson has suggested.
We have to give him time because we can't consider whatever he says into our decision.
Okay, well, we have one more person that wants to talk, so let him.
All right, Mr. or Miss Elwood, please state your name and address for the record, please. Put your video on if you could.
I am trying.
All right, hold on. Let's try something else. I'm going to mute you for a second. Let's see if this works better for these people. Let's give it. Okay, Miss Elwood, could you try to start your video now and unmute yourself? Okay, there we go.
Oh yeah, now I have that option.
All right, Ms. Elwood, let me just swear you in, okay?
Sure.
If you can raise your right hand. Do you swear any testimony you give tonight is going to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
And could you state and spell your name, please?
Lisa Elwood, ELWOOD, 35 Beverly Drive.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Churches are viewed as inherently beneficial and are permitted in the R zone as the conditional use. A conditional use may not be suitable for every lot in that zone. With the application before the board, although the church is inherently beneficial, the location in question certainly is not suitable. The lot is on a narrow stretch of Hillsborough Road, and the narrow width of the lot presents a host of issues for neighbors and the environment. The lot is in the middle of an established neighborhood. 20 households are within 200 feet, more than 100 within a quarter mile. The location for the proposed church is ill-suited and contributes to significant negative impacts on the community. Courts in New Jersey that hear municipal cases have required municipal boards to consider negative impacts on surrounding property owners, even for inherently beneficial uses. The board must then seek to mitigate the negative impacts by imposing reasonable conditions. However, when conditions cannot be imposed that would mitigate the negative impacts, a board can deny an inherently beneficial use. And I ask the board to do that with this application. I support my request by applying the balancing test. First, negative impacts include increased traffic in the neighborhood, additional light, noise, and exhaust from up to 60 cars accessing the property several times per week, light from an illuminated parking lot, which can remain lit until 10:30 p.m., and the lack of access to the location by pedestrians, which would be a major safety hazard. Second, the board has worked with the applicant to mitigate some of these negative impacts, and the applicant has been willing to address the deficiencies in its application that have concerned neighbors from the beginning. But in order to shoehorn the church and parking lot onto the ill-suited lot, they have nipped and tucked and again altered the site plans to reduce the impervious coverage by narrowing the driveway, drive aisles, and parking spots, all of which now do not meet code. They have narrowed the required buffer, which will no longer filter light and noise and protect neighbors' quiet enjoyment of their homes and yards. Third, the granting of the variances and waivers depends on whether there would be substantial detriment to the public good. In this case, the dimensions and location of the lot simply cannot be altered in such a way to adequately address the factors that contribute to the public detriment. No amount of alterations and conditions will be enough to mitigate the detriment to the neighborhood. The lot is not suitable. Further, there is nothing special or specific about this lot that makes it particularly suitable for the applicant. In fact, the opposite is true. The narrow width and location that can't be reached safely by foot contribute to significant deficiencies and public safety concerns. Other opportunities are available for the applicant to build the church. In making the case for the church, the applicant referenced the neighborhood elementary school. The potential impact of the church, however, differs greatly when compared with the school. It has a parking lot, but is not generally lit at night because the school operates Monday through Friday during the day. And the school does not have any regularly scheduled events that occur in the evening or weekends. So the impact on traffic, lighting, noise in the neighborhood is minimized, contrary to the church, which will have regularly scheduled events in the evenings and on weekends each and every week. Another issue is runoff. The application does not adhere to current state stormwater requirements. I understand that the new standards do not need to be met because of the date of this application, but it certainly makes residents less confident that best practices are being followed. Neighbors have raised major concerns about the runoff and flooding from the start, and the applicant has noted, based on their testing, there is an unusually high seasonal high water table. The seasonal high water table was higher than expected by the applicant and required adjustments to the site plans. The church has been elevated. The retention basin has been made more shallow. These factors lead to increased risks for residents trying to protect their properties. I'm also disappointed a thorough traffic impact analysis has not been conducted. A traffic study that evaluated traffic patterns, the volume and type of traffic on Hillsborough Road, and the speeds at which vehicles travel would be most welcomed. It would note that there aren't any streetlights on that section of Hillsborough Road. It would evaluate when and how the road is used by cyclists and pedestrians. It would document present hazards such as the narrowing of the roadway, the lack of a shoulder on the south side of the road, the limited sight distance from the rise in the road when approached from the west, and standing water that is present when it rains. Without a doubt, traffic flow would increase, and the increase would occur during times when local residents themselves are on the road, Sunday mornings, Saturday evenings, evenings during the week. And as the church grows to fill 180 seats, increased traffic would have an increasingly negative impact on the neighborhood. When the church holds an event, rents out space, or holds an outdoor event in the parking lot, such as a sunrise service, overflow parking will lead people to park on Beverly Drive and Ardsley. In order for those churchgoers to get to the church, they would need to walk in Hillsborough Road, not alongside of it, but in the road. And as the small congregation grows toward the building's capacity of 180, the number of events and frequency of activities will increase. So I'm back to where I began, the balancing of negatives and positives. This balancing test, while properly making it more difficult for municipalities to exclude beneficial uses, permits such exclusion when the negative impact of the use is significant. The negative impacts of the proposed church are so significant that there are no reasonable conditions that can be imposed to lessen the impacts on the community. Current residents and longtime property owners deserve the protections set forth in municipal statutes that are intended to ensure peaceful enjoyment of their properties and which establish expectations for property owners that the value of their property will not be indiscriminately diminished by allowing a permitted use on an unsuitable lot. I appreciate that the applicant has invested time and money in pursuing this project, was ill-advised from the start. I respectfully request that the board deny this application.
Thank you. Mark, do you have anything to say? Mark Anderson?
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Elwood refers to, at least by implication, a section of the statute, and perhaps it will be of some value if I read that to the board. This is certainly something the board members are generally familiar with, but like others, I don't claim a absolute photographic memory. So I always turn to the exact text when it's implicated. So I hope this will be of help to the board. The section in question says, no variance or other relief may be granted under the terms of this section. This section is section 70 of the municipal land use law, which is the powers of this board, without a showing that such variance or other relief can be granted without substantial detriment to the public good and will not substantially impair the intent and purpose of the zone plan and the zoning ordinance. Those are the magic words. That's not the entire section, but that's the relevant part. So again, it's clear that this applies to all variance relief from this board, whether involving an inherently beneficial use or not. Ms. Elwood referred to the balancing test, and that is essentially what is required by this section. The board has to determine whether there's a substantial detriment. The board would then have to determine whether that detriment can be mitigated satisfactorily by appropriate conditions. If it can, then the board has the obligation to impose those conditions. If it cannot, the board would have the obligation to reject the application.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Elwood, from members of the board? Anybody else? Mr. Brodnick, do you have any questions?
No questions.
Okay. Thank you, Mrs. Elwood. Very, very well researched.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to go, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to go back to Sean, who we had issues with. I think we'll be able to, let's see, maybe he left. I hope he didn't leave.
Yeah.
I don't see him, so we have somebody else, so I'll promote them. And again, please I think it's Julie Haber. Please unmute yourself, put your video on, state your name and address for the record, spelling your last name. Julie Haber, maybe? Oh, you had it. There you go. Could you please state your name and address for the record, please?
My name is Glenn Haber. I'm sitting here with Julie Haber, but I'm speaking on my behalf. And my address is 479, oh, I'm sorry, GLEN HA, B as in boy, ER. I live at 479 Hillsborough Road, which is a property that is, I take it northwest.
Glenn, I just need to swear you in, all right?
Oh, absolutely.
You raise your right hand. Do you swear any testimony you give tonight is going to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
I don't come nearly as prepared as the previous person. Just want to state that everything that I've heard in opposition to this, as far as the light, the traffic, primarily the past year of working from home due to COVID, I sit in my home office, so I basically don't leave the property 24/7. And my office is in the front of the house, which faces Hillsborough Road. I can verify and attest. I constantly see people walking up the side of the roads. Very dangerous, should be a sidewalk in some capacity, and just increased traffic. Personally, from my opinion, I strongly disagree with it, and just wanted to propose or offer my opposition. That's all I have to say.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, anybody else out there?
All right, hold on one second. Okay, anybody else from the public? Sean Hemmings, I don't know where you went. If you could raise your hand again. Oh, there's John Hemmings. I don't know if it's the same.
Not raising his hand.
He's not raising his hand. Maybe it's a different Hemmings. Again, this will be your last chance in the public to speak on this application. So if you could please raise your hand. Mr. Hemmings, if you hear me that we couldn't get your video on, we can try again, but Chairman, I see no one. So, oh, wait a minute. Shirley has raised her hand. Hello, Shirley, if you could unmute yourself. Again, please state your name and address, but our Mike will swear you in, please.
Okay.
Hi, Shirley. If you could raise your right hand. You swear any testimony you give tonight is going to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
And if you could just state and spell your name and give us your address.
My name is Shirley Marlatt, Marlatt. My address is 480 Hillsborough Road. I'm just wondering why there hasn't been a more in-depth traffic study, because I did one myself from my front porch, and the figures that they had were lower. And also, in regards to traffic, they maintain that there won't be much traffic on Sunday. But for 58 years, I've been exiting my driveway to go to church at 9 o'clock on Sunday morning. And sometimes I have to wait there now for 4 or 5 minutes before I can get out of the driveway. I just can't imagine what would happen if there were 60 cars turning into the driveway next door to me, and I was going south on Hills. Is that south? No, east on Hillsborough Road. I don't know what they could do about that. There's going to be a traffic light, or is there going to be something to control the traffic? I don't know who to address this to, but I can see a problem there.
And this is Marla. I do have a question for you, if you don't mind. Okay, your neighbor brought up the notion of giving up property to widen that section of Hillsborough Road. Would you agree to that also if we do this application?
Did you hear what he said? No. Tell him to repeat it. There'll still be 60 cars turning into the driveway.
No,
next
he's asking
Thursday.
if you would give up your property.
Oh,
Yeah, Mrs. Klotz said that if this was approved, she would be agreeable to giving up 10 feet of a front property so they could widen Hillsborough Road. And that would, all three property owners did that. That would solve a major problem.
well, that'll solve the problem about the runners, the walkers, and those people. But as far as turning either left or right, depending which direction they're coming from, there'll still be 60 cars that I'll have to cope with when I can try to
Yeah,
get out.
Frank, I don't think we should ask her for an answer now. I think that's unfair.
Okay.
Yeah, Frank, this is comment section, not questions, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Withdrawing question. Any additional input? Shirley?
You want to say anything else?
No. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sharon.
Thank you for your input. Okay, anybody else out there? At this point, then we'll close the lines for public comment. And I'll ask Mr. Ogrodnik if he has any rebuttal to any of the testimony.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, very briefly, Christine Nazaro Cofone is our professional planner, who is a partner at our own firm. Just a couple of minutes, Christine, on comments from the opposition planner, please.
Christine, can you unmute yourself and put your video on? I know she was here. I see her, but. Ms. Cofone, you're still muted and no video. I don't know if she stepped away, Mr. Ogrodnik, but.
Maybe more.
There we go.
You still muted herself.
Mr. Ogrodnik, can you call her or something? Because she's not.
I just saw her unmute herself.
Yeah, she remuted herself.
Ms. Cofone, could you just provide the rebuttal testimony?
Hold on. Hello? Hi, I'm sorry. I'm having trouble. I'm going to have to log in from a different computer. If you could give me a minute.
Got it.
Okay, thank you.
To answer your question, Mark, the DCA made these requirements because they have no engineers on their board at this point.
Well, that's as good a theory as I've heard.
They're all lawyers, right?
Well, I mean, to be fair,
herein lies the reason to go in person.
to be fair to the DCA, presumably at least part of the reason is because the board would have a better opportunity to judge the veracity of a witness if they can see them as well as hear them. That's really the best I can offer.
Just like the Supreme Court does, right?
The Supreme Court doesn't hear testimony, remember.
They don't, when they're doing Zoom, they only do audio.
Yeah, as I say, they don't take testimony. They take only legal argument.
Does that apply to the New Jersey State Supreme Court?
It does. In general, the appellate courts do not take testimony. That would include the appellate division, the first level of appeal in New Jersey, as well as the New Jersey Supreme Court.
Ms. Cofone, I don't know if you can hear me, but when you do log in, if I don't see you come in right away, please raise your hand. I am paying attention, but I just wanted to make sure if I don't pop you in right away, please raise your hand.
Okay, hold on one second.
Sure.
Yeah, actually, legal testimony is, like technical, technical testimony in a way. Oops, lost again.
Okay, she looks like she dropped out, so hopefully she'll come back in.
These are the more fun parts of these remote meetings. The frustration of
for who, Mr. Anderson?
Technology. Well, for those of us, particularly like to be frustrated and have something to curse about.
And have to write a legal response or a report about. Mhm.
That's my daily job, Mr. Anderson. Thank you very much.
I do know that. I said that is much for your benefit as anyone else's.
Remember
Well.
when we used to have the teleconferences?
Yes, I do.
All of you did very well with that, by the way.
Hey, while we're waiting, can I ask Michael a question?
Sure.
Hey, Michael, in the event in the future that the two adjoining neighbors agreed to provide the necessary land to widen Hillsborough Road, would the applicant be willing to join them and expand the highway?
Yeah, I mean, that the whole reason why we proposed that dedication was because it just makes sense, because it's the
Right.
missing piece of the puzzle. I can tell you that I'm personally tasked with widening Falcon Road as part of the Premier Homes subdivision, the over 55 community and the apartment buildings on 206. And I think we're in year 6 of that battle, because if the town condemns it, it's a lot easier to get a waiver from your mortgage company. So if you have a mortgage, the mortgage company doesn't want you to give up land. And we've had a tremendous difficulty in not only appraising all those lots, but then negotiating purchase prices. And so I can tell you that widening roads is not easy unless you do it through the power of condemnation. So, we're doing it. We probably have 90% of the houses and the properties ready to be, negotiated. But, people tend to shy away from approaching their mortgage company with a request for less land and just the trouble of that. So,
Well, Mr. Ogrodnik, it seems to me that Mr. Stanley's question was a little bit easier than that. Yes or no?
Yeah, I mean,
I'm saying is I'm not looking for any action from the applicant whatsoever. All I'm saying is if the adjoining neighbors agree to some sort of solution if it does happen in the future, would the applicant agree to, go along with whatever action is being pursued? But I'm not saying the applicant should take the lead on anything.
Well, Mr. Stanley, is your question whether the applicant would do the same improvement across the joining lots as is proposed across the front of theirs? Assuming, of course, that they got permission from the property owners.
And see, the applicant has already proposed to widen in front of his property.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm not proposing that the applicant is responsible for those neighbors widening.
Not responsible for paying for the improvement.
Right.
Okay, so I see we have Christine back on.
I'm just asking.
We'll cooperate in any way to
Yes.
get.
I just asked for cooperation and.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, Ms. Cofone is on and visible.
Yes. Hi, good evening.
Michael, do you want to swear her in?
She's already sworn in.
He is sworn. Ms. Cofone, if you just acknowledge that you remain under oath in this matter.
Great.
Yes, Mr. Anderson, I acknowledge I am still under oath.
Mr. Granick?
Ms. Cofone, could you just provide some comments when you listened to the opposition planner and just give your opinion on some of the comments that were made?
Sure. Well, certainly we can have, differing opinions on things, but, I think that churches or houses of worship are an inherently beneficial use. And I believe a comparison was made to schools where they do serve a community interest. But it is my opinion from a planning point of view that houses of worship are unequivocally a protected class and do provide an intrinsic value to the community, which is why they are so treated as inherently beneficial uses. So I think I believe I diverge with Mr. Nelson there, and that I believe he said, you know, he felt that schools do, but he didn't seem to believe that churches do or house of worship do. So I would certainly disagree with that. And he also made a comment, I believe, about if we were to acquire some additional property. Now, we are a conditionally permitted use in the zone. The only conditions that we violate are the de minimis increase for impervious coverage and the lot width. So the two lots on either side of us are similarly non-conforming. So if we acquired property from either one of them, we would be able to cure our non-conformity, but they would then be non-conforming. However, if we acquired additional property, you know, depending on what we did, it's likely we could eliminate the impervious coverage variance. So I think that, and then we would be back before the board for any site plan. So that's not the application that's before this board. And whether an applicant could acquire property someday down the road, I'm not really sure that that's material for the board to even deliberate. That's not the application. There's been no direct testimony, no overture that this applicant's going to acquire any additional land. So I don't think that that's really something that's to be considered. I don't see the relevance to this application to that. And I guess he provided some testimony in the Moskowitz book about the definition of a roof, but there's been a determination made that that is part of the structure and that we don't need that structure setback. So I'm not sure that I didn't find that testimony particularly relevant either. So I think that there was nothing said this evening from a planning point of view that makes me deviate or waver from the testimony that I've previously offered in conjunction with this application.
Thank you, Ms. Cofone.
You're welcome.
Any questions, members of the board, for a statement just then? So I have a couple. Okay, so John, you?
No, I don't.
Okay, okay, so I've picked up from Mr. Nelson. He said this was an inappropriate intrusion into a homogeneous neighborhood. And how do you respond to that this is just inappropriate?
Well, it's difficult to come to the conclusion that it's inappropriate when legislatively the governing body has decided that this is an appropriate use subject to certain conditions, that this is appropriate. So I think that not only would I agree with him, but the governing body has allowed this use to conditionally be here. So how do we get to the conclusion from a planning point of view that this is an inappropriate here for a 3-foot deviation on the width and a slight increase in the impervious coverage? So I'm not sure that I can agree with Mr. Nelson that it's an inappropriate location when it's a conditionally permitted use in the zone. And when you're dealing with a conditionally permitted use, you're not dealing with, is this an appropriate location for this use? What you're dealing with is absent compliant with those conditional use standards, is this an appropriate location? So I guess what the board has to reconcile is with the minimal deviation in lot width and a minimal increase in the impervious coverage, is this still an appropriate location? I don't think that the test is this a threshold inappropriate location for a house of worship?
You're saying that if they had the width, then this would be appropriate?
Well, I guess that's what Mr. Nelson is saying, is that we don't have the width, so it's not appropriate, but we're talking about, I believe, 3 feet here. So
you're saying it's
on a 200-foot lot.
Okay, and to Mrs. Elwood's point that the balancing test, that this is, you know, the negatives greatly outweigh the positives in this case.
Well, that is her opinion, and I'm not sure. I believe that Mrs. Elwood probably feels that based on her testimony, it seems as though she feels as this is a wholesale inappropriate use for this area. And I don't think that the zoning supports that. I think that it is definitely an appropriate location for a house of worship. The zoning supports that. And I think that we need very little variance relief in conjunction with this application. So, and I understand she read that, you know, when you have an inherently beneficial use, you have to focus on the negative criteria. But what she read the criteria, but I was not persuaded by her perceived negative impacts. I don't think that there's any negative impacts that she raised that were related to the variance relief that's required in conjunction with this application.
Any more questions from members of the board? If not, I'll turn it over to questions from the public. Mr. Mensch, do you have any?
Frank, I have one kind of statement that given this board's experience in dealing with, and not a church, but with inherently beneficial uses, if you recall, you know, we get to weigh the inherently beneficial versus non, but we've been presented, you know, no concrete testimony about, you know, concrete negative impact, and I'm concerned about that. That's my comment.
Okay, Frank, let's move it along.
Okay, Mr. Mensky, I have any questions for you?
I have no questions, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, and you have to open up to the public. Any questions from the public not represented by Mr. Mensch?
So Chairman, these are questions for
Christine.
These are questions again from the public. These are questions for Ms. Cafone, who just testified. It's not comment time, it's questions for this witness. So please state your name and address for the record, please.
Hi, am I on?
I see.
Hello?
Hello?
Yes, can you please state your name and address for the record and spell your last name?
David Warner, 54 Beverly Drive, Warner.
Thank you.
So I just have a question. Christine had mentioned, and it continues to be mentioned, about the inherent and beneficial use to the community. And I'm just wondering what that benefit is and who in the community the church serves. And if Christine has any idea of the makeup of the congregation, in other words, is it members of the community or members from outside of the community that are coming to use this property? And if it's not members of the community, what inherent or beneficial use does it serve?
Mark, can you jump in on that?
And pardon me, we need video.
If this is questions, we don't need video. Ms. Haynes, I think it's a legitimate question, and I would prefer to let the witness try to answer that. If after that you or the board members have questions about the law, I'll certainly try to answer.
I actually thought those questions were answered in previous testimony.
And you have to, I was at a lot of these meetings. Forgive me if I missed it, but I haven't heard it in any of the testimony that's been given about who the makeup of this, church would be. Is it members of the community, or is it members?
I sure have. That was prior testimony. I've been at every meeting. So, but somebody even brought up Franklin or some other adjoining town. But
okay, I must have missed it. Can it be repeated?
I do think that it's a fair question, given the testimony, the rebuttal testimony that was given, even if it is to some extent repetitious. And I'm sure Ms. Confone can answer it quickly and concisely.
Please do, Ms. Confone.
I think the testimony was offered last time we were together, that the reason this location was attractive to the congregation was that it would reduce the travel time for some of their members. So I think certainly there are members of the Hillsborough community that would be benefiting from this organization. And I believe that testimony was offered at the last hearing. So I respectfully think that this is an inherently beneficial use. That testimony has been offered as to where the congregation currently worships, as well as how this will benefit that worshiping congregation population. So I think that was asked and answered last month, and I think that substantial testimony was provided as to why this location was certainly desirable to the congregation.
In that testimony, was a number of Hillsborough residents provided?
I don't know that a number was provided, but I don't know that the lack of a number, in my opinion, is not necessary. It benefits Hillsborough residents and it benefits the general welfare and the general public. Inherently beneficial, I'm not finished answering the question. The inherently beneficial case law does not require you to quantify the number of persons that are benefiting from the use. So I'm not familiar. In fact, I've never heard a case testified to where I personally have testified as to the number of persons and quantifying that as far as the number of residents that would be benefiting.
Well, just because you've never heard of it doesn't mean that it shouldn't be quantified or said to this community. I mean, the board is making a decision, and just because you've never heard of it doesn't mean that it shouldn't be told to the public.
Well, I think it's very arbitrary. Where does that line get drawn? There's no standard. There's no standard in your ordinances here in Hillsborough. There's no standard or regulation in a Moskowitz book or any planning treatise that I'm aware of that says this is the number that makes it appropriate. So I don't think it's a proper thing to look at, which is why there's no treatise on the number of persons served. So
that's my question. You can't even provide a number. Is it 1? Is it 5? Is it less than 10?
I'm gonna object to the question in that it was asked and answered at the prior hearing with Pastor Sue. It's also set forth in a certification, not specifically how many members of the congregation live in Hillsborough, but I do recall testimony that several members of the congregation did reside in Hillsborough. But I'm going to object to that as already asked and answered.
You're right, Michael. Pastor Sue did mention, and he provided some numbers of who lived in Hillsborough and outside of Hillsborough. I don't have the notes in front of me, but I know he did answer questions from the public regarding.
Mr. Chairman, I suggest to the board that Mr. Ogrodnik's objection should be well taken. Frankly, not necessarily entirely for the reasons he expressed, but I do think that he makes a proper objection.
Okay, so.
And just for the board's clarification, and I do apologize. I was on a lot of these meetings. I know I've spoken before. I missed that meeting. So if I had heard that meeting, I probably wouldn't be on here asking the question. So that's the reason why I'm bringing it up now.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, any more questions? Or? Okay, so we have one more hand raised, Fred.
Again, these are questions for this witness, please. Are you there, Ms. Elwood? Mr. Elwood, can you unmute yourselves? There
Yes.
you go.
Lisa Elwood, 35 Beverly Drive. Just regarding the inherently beneficial use, I don't think that has been questioned at all. But a question for the planner that Hillsborough statute says that for members to support an application like this, the conditional use, they have to determine that the conditional use is reasonably necessary for the convenience of the public in the location proposed. And maybe you could comment on, are you saying that every lot in the zone would be suitable for a church?
You have, Christine, you have to.
Ms. Cafone, you're still muted. There you go.
This lot is conditionally zoned for a church. So we meet the lion's share of those conditional use standards. So I'm not going to speak to every zone and every property in every zone because I don't have any specifics on the size of the lot. So what I will say is that if it were another zone that conditionally allowed houses of worship and we substantially complied with the conditions that the governing body wrote into the ordinance, then yes, from a planning point of view, I would have a very difficult time saying that that's not an appropriate location, considering that we comply with all of the standards in the ordinance, or substantially comply with the standards in the ordinance.
Would you comment on the Supreme Court observing in Coventry Square versus Westward Zoning Board of Adjustment? They said that a conditional use may be suitable to a zoning district, but not to every location within the district.
And that's why you write conditional use standards. That's right. So it can be, if it were suitable to every location in the district, then it would be a permitted use and it wouldn't have to have conditions associated with it. So I would agree with that in Coventry Square. And that's why a conditional use is treated differently than a permitted use. When you have a permitted use in the zone, they're permitted as of right. They don't have those ancillary conditional use standards. So Coventry Square also said that you look at those conditional use standards. And in this case, we only violate 2 of them, and we're very, very close to conforming. We are a couple feet shy, and we are very similar to the lots on either side of us and the lot coverage. So those are the only standards that we violate from a conditional use standpoint. And I think that you have to be guided by the fact that the law is very clear, is that when you're dealing with compliant with a conditional use variance, what the board's focus is, absent compliant with those conditional use standards. Not is it a wholesale application to anywhere in the zone, because that's already been decided by the governing body. They chose the locations where it would be conditionally allowed. They chose the zones where it would be conditionally allowed. If they weren't, they'd be dealing with permitted uses, not conditional uses.
Did you say that the properties on either side have similar impervious coverage numbers?
I said they have, no, I said they have similar dimensions with respect to the width. So they also don't meet the 200-foot width. So if we were to try to get some land from there, those lots would not comply with that conditional use standard if they were to be developed in that way.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, I don't see any more hands up, friends, so I guess we can close public.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And are we ready for concluding statements from the attorneys?
Yes, Mr. Herbert. Mr. Anderson, do you want me to go first, or?
Yes, I believe that's appropriate.
I'm going to keep this very short because I completely agree with Ms. Caffone's conclusions that we really do have to look at the standards that we're deviating from. You know, I do a lot of land use applications and, you know, I see a lot of opposition, you know, for things like drive-throughs and warehouses. And I'm not sure when houses of worship became so disfavored in municipalities. And I can understand a lot of these churches that are going up. I would describe them as mega churches. But when you look at the actual testimony from Pastor Sue, it's really, you know, a Sunday service. Every other day is, you know, 15 people for a prayer meeting at night. It's a very low impact use. It's off peak. With respect to traffic, you know, you're looking at 2 trips, morning peak hour, 7 evening peak hour, and then 64 on the weekend, again, to address the services. So I don't think it's a very impactful use. I think that the congregation, who I've had a great opportunity to meet with, and I think they'll be welcomed in the community. They're absolutely wonderful people. And I really don't understand some of the concerns. Mr. Stiers has gone through ad nauseum. We've spent an incredible amount of money redesigning this site and to comply with NJAC 7:9, all the stormwater regs. And every time I, you know, see opposition with respect and concern with respect to stormwater, you know, I want to scream, because we're going to improve that. This is going to improve the stormwater and guide it to a place where it will drain downgrade. So I think this is a good project. I believe that people should have the right to develop their land consistent with what's permitted. And I think it's going to be a welcome addition to the community. Thank you.
Mr. Mensch, would you like to?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have a few remarks. I'm going to be slightly longer than Mr. Gronick, but not by much. It's getting late. I agree with Mr. Gronick's last statement that individuals have the right to develop their property in conformance with the standards. This doesn't. The governing body in Hillsborough Township has determined when you can develop a house of worship in this zone. They've set forth conditions for that. We've heard the applicants' witnesses testify over and over again that it's permitted. It's not permitted. It's only permitted if conditions are met. The conditions are not met here. And the crux of this issue is the applicant has presented this as, we're really, really close. We're a couple feet here. We're less than a percentage there. So essentially, board, it's when they said 15% impervious, they really were okay with 16. But of course, that's not what the governing body said. They said 15. And the goal when you have conditions for conditionally permitted use is that these things all act in concert. They act together to stop overdevelopment. And that's what this is. It's overdevelopment for this site. It has nothing to do with the fact that it's a church and we're going to like the folks who will be there or not. This is trying to cram a large development into a small portion of a narrow property in the middle of a residential zone. That's what the Hillsborough governing body intended to stop when it set forth these standards, because they act together to prohibit this development. The lot's too narrow. Okay, if that was the only thing we were here for, maybe this would be a non-issue. The impervious coverage is now over. To decrease the impervious coverage, we need waivers from design standards. Because we need to meet design standards in health safety, we now need to decrease the side yard setback. All of these things combined demonstrate that this is exactly what is not permitted. Now, we've talked about inherently beneficial. I know some of the public members had questions. We all know that a church by law is an inherently beneficial use. We know that. We're not arguing it's not. But the law is also very clear, as was testimony from both planners, and of course, you all know from your experience, that you still have to meet the negative criteria. And of course, it is the applicant's burden. The applicant has to show that the overall benefit of the application will not negatively impact the community. That's their burden to show it won't. We've heard testimony from both during cross-examination of the applicant's witnesses, through our planner and public who testified both through us and separately, with regard to their concerns. There's no questioning that this is going to be a large building in a residential area. It is. It's not up for dispute. You've all seen the pictures. You can draw your own conclusions from it. But we've seen and heard that testimony. We know there's going to be lighting issues. We know there's going to be an impact on traffic. And it should be noted that your own environmental commission requested there be an actual traffic study. We've heard discussion that there has not been an actual traffic study. There's been some projections based on numbers in the book. I found it ironic that Ms. Gaffone in her testimony now took issue with some testimony by our planner with regard to, well, maybe if they got more land, this could be a different application. It could get bigger, and we should stick with the application that's in front of us. I actually agree with Ms. Gaffone on that point. To the same point, a lot of her testimony was geared towards, hey, board, this could be worse. We're not doing a community center. We're not doing a library. So in other words, the traffic from this is a lot less than it could be. We don't have those applications here. What we have is an application that's going to have a 180-foot AC church that's going to capacity, which means, of course, if the church grows, which every church wants to, that they could have multiple services. They're going to have events. And of course, if they do come, they're going to want to succeed. So we have the negative criteria. You've heard the testimony from it. And the applicant cannot show that there's a basis for granting the waivers as accepted, as proposed. To the extent that the board does move forward with the application, then of course the board has discussed several conditions that have been discussed throughout the application. We'd certainly ask that they be imposed, along with a requirement that the street be widened in front of those 3 properties to the extent that the homeowners are willing to do so. But at the end of the day, the application should not be approved. There's a question, and I don't know, Mr. Anderson, if you want me to address it now, I will, with regard to what exactly is required, what variances are needed. We all know that a D3 conditional variance is needed, but and a variance for the impervious coverage itself. But what we spend some time now deciding, I think this board will have to make a decision, is this really one building? I thought that the applicant's proposal for the covered walkway was clever, but one, it doesn't change what's there. We all know it's 2 buildings, but we don't have to say, well, we know it. The definitions in Hillsborough's own ordinances define roof and define the causeway. So there's no other definition. We should be looking to what Hillsborough defines as a roof, which is not what's proposed. They don't meet their own ordinance. If they do, then there's 2 principal uses in one building and needs a D1 variance. There's case law which suggests that when you have a conditionally permitted use that doesn't meet the conditions, you still need the variance for the accessory use. It's not automatic as it would be if it was permitted. If it is two separate buildings, then you need a separate D variance with regard to having two principal buildings on the property, in which case there's been no testimony that they've met those criteria, and they don't. If it's an accessory building, then you have the issue of a waiver for the front yard setback of an accessory building. So there's a lot of open issues that the applicant has not met. For all those reasons, this application should be denied.
Thank you. Okay, at this point, I'm going to ask for a motion to close public so the board can proceed with its deliberations. Do I hear a
Motion to close public.
Is there a second?
Second.
Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Public is closed.
Mr. Chairman, if I can make a recommendation at this point, I observe that it's not as late as this board has been required to meet in various times, but it is not an early hour. It's 10:15. I also observe that the application is a little unusual in that there have been a number of legal questions asked. Typically in applications like this, there are practical engineering, planning questions, but there were several legal issues, which it seems to me the board is going to need to resolve in order to determine even which direction it goes, not just whether it should be approved or not, but what would need to be approved or what should not be approved. Given those circumstances, I would suggest that it might be of value to the board if Mr. Ogrodnik and Mr. Mensch provided the board with as brief as possible an outline of their position on those legal issues. As I've noted them, and my list may not be exhaustive, there is the question certainly pressed by Mr. Mensch as to whether the what's been described as a breezeway really accomplishes the purpose of making this a single building. I would also call the attorney's attention to section 188-9 of the Hillsborough ordinance, which has been referred to somewhat tangentially, but I think requires some degree of consideration. So my suggestion is that might be of help to the board. The board may want to move forward with this, and I can certainly understand that it would, but the board, I think, always works at its peril if the legal issues are not resolved before they deal with the practical and quasi-judicial issues that they also need to deal with.
Okay, so
Mark,
I
you know
think-
what, Frank, let me
Move on.
interrupt. You know what, okay, the definition of a breezeway and a building and to keep dragging this out, it just seems to me we've just about exhausted every aspect of this. Mark, my personal feeling is some of these issues really don't play into what I think will be the board's decision making. But if I'm wrong, please, the rest of the board members speak up.
Well, I agree with Chicky. I have all, everything listed with the waivers, this numerous conditions we have laid out, which takes up 2 pages for a motion. So I really don't think we should delay this, Frank. We have enough, I have enough information, and
Well,
so I agree with you.
I disagree. I think I like what Mark had to say, and I think we should pursue and take his advice.
Well, that's good for you, Kurt. All right.
Well, you don't speak for everyone. Everybody else
You
can.
said that again. You sound like a broken record, Kurt. You said that the last 3 meetings.
okay, let me.
Stay professional, John, all right?
Okay, come on. Look, Kurt, I have a question for you. You missed the last 2 meetings. Have you watched the meetings on YouTube.
I heard all that, yes. My suggestion is what Mark
Yeah, okay,
said. I'd like
Kurt,
to hear it.
Okay,
if
so
you did read, if you did, let me finish, Frank. If you did read and look at the videos or whatever, what are some of the waivers and conditions that we
Hey,
agreed upon?
John, look, be professional. I'm just answering what Mark had said. So I like his suggestion. So I agree with Mark. I'd like to.
He never asked, he didn't ask a question, Kurt. I was wondering if you know some of the waivers and conditions that we talked about.
John,
let's stop it.
yeah.
Okay, so we have
Right.
two members that think we can move ahead right now.
Any of the other members could speak up because Chicky and John, they don't run the show all the time.
You sound like a broken record again.
Let's go through a board members, see who wants to, decide right now who wants to get briefed on the legal issues further.
Bill, can we move on tonight?
Let's hear everybody else.
I'd like to hear, at this point, I'd like to get feedback from the other board members, please.
Frank, just speaking for myself, I don't think I need the resolution to the roof issue in order to vote tonight. So I'm happy to go forward.
Happy to go forward. Anybody else?
Yeah, I'm ready to go forward.
I think we have enough people that say we're ready to go forward. Philomena, you going to say something?
Need to, Phil, Ms. Sewell, you need to unmute. There you go.
I apologize.
No
I
problem.
tried before and I didn't realize I was muted. I think I'm prepared to move forward.
Okay.
But I have a couple of things I would like to say before that. Is that this has been a very complicated, if you will, situation in one way. And listening to the residents and the time and effort that they put into it. But a house of worship. And when we look at the inherent beneficial to it, and we look around Hillsborough and we see where there are churches of all faiths, religions, groups, whatever the case may be, we do have similar situations like this. And I think that the applicant did a good job, and I also think that the objectors did a very good job. But based on that, and reducing it perhaps somewhat to the less complexity of looking really in depth to the legal part of it, I would be prepared to move forward and vote this evening.
Okay. And so we're going to go ahead this evening, Mark. Okay, so and let me throw a couple of thoughts in myself. I don't know how this is going to turn out over the next hour or so, but I don't want if it goes against the church, I don't want them to think that we don't want to welcome them here. And at the same time, I fully understand how the neighbors feel with this building going in, because I was in that exact position myself when I first moved into Hillsborough. So it's got work cut out for us tonight. Okay, so having said that, where do we start? Do I hear a proposed motion? Do we want further discussion? Resolve any issues?
Mark, what would you suggest be the next step for us? A motion?
Whether the motion is made first or second, the most important thing is that whatever decision is made, the board clearly articulate its reasons for arriving at the conclusion. So my most important concern would be if there was simply a motion, let's do it, and then there's just a vote, that will be devoid of an explanation. Particularly with a contested application, it is important that the board provide its explanation and its reasons, whichever way it decides.
Thank you, Mark.
I do point out also that this is a D variance, so it requires five affirmative votes for approval.
Thanks, Mark.
You're welcome.
Mark,
Going through the last 4 meetings with this application, I understand in and feel what the neighbors have been bringing up, but also with the applicant, who they've improved, abided by, even with the drainage. It really improved that property when it came to moving the water out of there. But, we're looking at the lot width, which was discussed. 200's required, it's at 195, and the impervious 15's required, and we're at 15.8. But we already know with the parking spaces 9 by 18 and the buffer being 13 instead of 30. The applicants already agreed, and it would be in a motion that they're going to agree to any zoning official engineering recommendations or fire marshal recommendations, which they've done already. But even with the conditions, they agreed to the light poles remaining at 15 feet. They've shown where the lighting will not exit their property. They're going to agree to a 6-foot fence. I'm going to put in the condition, a 6-foot height fence made of cedar or redwood. The neighbors voiced their opinion on a good quality fence, and I did the due diligence, and cedar or redwood would accommodate what the neighbors were concerned with. Their lights are going to be off no later than 10:30. There's going to be no outdoor sound systems. There's going to be no subdivision, no overnight guests. There's going to be no use on the back area, that 600-foot rear area. They're going to, if possible, preserve that hickory tree. There's going to be no tree clearing from April to September 30th. They're going to agree to regular upkeep and maintenance of the property. And of course, in the future, if there's any plans on widening the road, they stated they'd be cooperative with the other two neighbors to do that. So the height of the building is at a bare minimum. It's not a tall building. The buffering, from what I've seen, we've seen many applications within the last 20 years on this board, and they've done everything that's been asked. So that's some of the positive criteria of the application from my standpoint.
Hey, John, it's Patrick. Just to clarify, I might miss it because my internet was stumbling around a little bit. You're okay with the 9-foot wide spaces, 18 feet long?
9 by 18.
Yep.
That's what was discussed, right?
Yep. Just making sure because I stumbled around a little bit.
Yep.
Right, and John, the waiver for the more narrow aisles, I think it was 24 foot instead of 30. Whatever was presented.
But that's already presented, right? We don't need that waiver, right?
It is a waiver, I think, right?
But
Yeah,
it is a requested waiver, yes.
Yeah, so grant that.
What was that again, Chicky, that I should include?
24 foot instead of 30 feet, I think.
For the
aisles.
Aisle width in the parking lot.
Aisle width, okay. Oh, and they also, of course, agreed for the environmental conservation agreement. I forgot to throw that one in there, so the applicant's been more than cooperative.
I'll second that so that there's now discussion from board.
The only thing I would observe is Mr. Stamler referred to the fence, but I think it would be helpful to say the precise location that he's suggesting.
The precise location, yeah, in my motion, right, it'll be, the precise location would be where the parking spaces reside.
Okay. So we have a second, further discussion on the motion.
And I just find it so interesting that there's so many hoops that have to go through here because of the chain reaction of things that's taken place. It's like you're trying to stuff 6 pounds of meat into a 5-pound sausage casing, and you have to give a little here. Okay, well now the buffer's only this because we need the fire lane, and the spaces have to be reduced. And I just went through a commercial variance application in another district, and I understand the expense that's involved, and I really feel for the applicant in this circumstance. But I'm very moved by the testimony of Ms. Elwood in particular today, but also of the opposition planner, that if you look at this holistically, this doesn't belong on this site. I just don't see how this is the right spot for this when there's so many other places in Hillsborough where this could be. And you know, I feel bad for the neighbors that, you know, this is a very big facility that's going in the front 40% of the property. Yes, it's a 5-acre lot, but the back 3 acres aren't really used for anything. You're talking about all of this development being crammed right adjacent to the neighbors' houses. And I'm not comfortable with it.
Anybody else?
I hear what Jim just said, and I, excuse me, and I appreciate what he just said because it's very valid. However, if it was unique, excuse me, to this particular circumstance with this house of worship, as compared to some of the other houses of worship, church, synagogues, or whatever that occur in Hillsborough, we do have congested areas. We do have heavy traffic. We do have an awful lot of what was mentioned in the good job that John did in putting the motion together. Perhaps not to the extent, I don't know, but I do know that in some areas there's schools associated with, there's schools across the street, which is a good thing. There's property that's bordering right on residential areas. There's churches that are very close to wetlands, but it's a house of worship. And that's what I feel most comfortable with as I'm giving my, my opinion right now. It is a house of worship. And something that resonated with me with Pastor Hughes was that we would like to live in peace, in harmony with our neighbors, and that be at the church and also the residents. And I sincerely hope that definitely will happen if this should pass this evening. And if not, peace and harmony as well.
And I think Pastor Sue even spoke to that. Because all the hoops that, Jim, you mentioned and all, most of the hoops were really to accommodate the neighbors and us from keeping it
No, I think they've gone out of their way, John, to try and make this work on a property that isn't really well suited for it. I mean, it's just not, I wish it was a 5-acre square where you could have, all sorts of buffering and, it would be a lot better. But this property is almost 6 times as long as it is wide.
Again, when I look at the property now and what it will look like, I see a big improvement, not only for the, especially for the stormwater.
And you know what, I don't know what the residents, Ms. Klutz said she would agree to it. I don't know about Shirley, but if they both agree to the widening, it will be, I think, a safety issue for their property as well, for that whole length of Hillsborough Road, where it would allow a shoulder at the expense of the applicant. And I know this is one of those really, really tough decisions by board members.
Widening of the road, though, is a process. I think Michael, Mr. Rogoski mentioned that, that is a process. It's something to look forward to and something that would certainly be beneficial with the cooperation of everyone. But then again, it brings me back to the word peace and harmony, no matter which way this goes.
Right. Yep.
Agreed.
Okay, Frank.
My 2 cents, maybe 3 cents. First of all, the applicant, absolutely bent over backwards to try to meet all the problems that exist on this property. It's not the best property, but at the same time, it is on a township road. It's not like it's inside Beverly Drive or part of the, development itself. So it is on a township road, and that they're willing to, if the neighbors agree, that's the only place on Hillsborough Road that narrows down like that. So that, they're solving a safety problem if they widen that street. And it also helps the Kletzes out from the, they get rid of that bad corner of their property. That's always a problem to them. Mrs. Moat, gets the benefit of getting an 8-foot fence, 6-foot fence, so she doesn't get the headlights. So it's a sort of a win-win in a way for the immediate neighbors. The neighbors further away, there's so many trees, they're not going to see headlights and that type of stuff. And most importantly, we're not the court of last resort here. If we deny this, the applicant will be in Superior Court next week, and you hand it off to a judge. God knows, I'm guessing now. But God knows what a judge could do. He could tell us to do anything and take it out of our hands. So all the things that we tried to do for help the neighbors could be potentially undone by a judge that's having a bad day. So, you have to keep that in mind if we deny this tonight, because it could be reversed. And matter of fact, the church, it could be reversed in the federal court or a state court, because you have First Amendment issues and as well as land use issues. So, deny it. We deny this at our peril. I think we're just going to end up spending a lot of township money fighting an appeal that we're going to lose. So that's my prediction. Okay, so Mark is.
No, I was not expressing any opinion one way or another.
Remember, I dropped out of law school halfway through. So there you go.
I think the significant part is, and I'm going to keep going back to this, and I'll say it the last time. It's a house of worship. It's a house of one type of faith. We are a township of many types of faith. This is a particular piece of property that they sought out. I don't necessarily know all the reasons why it was this particular property, but it was, and it's the one that they chose, and they will work very hard to make it compatible. And I'm going to use a generic term, user-friendly, if you will. It helps with a situation with the water problem. There are other issues, but as a house of worship and moving forward with it, I think we should bring this to a conclusion and take it to a vote. And again, whichever way the vote goes, peace be with everybody.
Okay, everybody finished?
Yes.
Okay, Mike, call a roll, please. Okay, so again, the motion is.
Motion is to approve.
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Haynes spoke to what I understood to be a potential additional condition that was not in Mr. Stamler's motion. I don't know whether she wishes to pursue that or whether she's satisfied with the motion the way Mr. Stamler stated it.
Which is,
well, Mark, if you're talking about if the two neighbors agreed that the off-site improvements would be assumed by the applicant, I thought John. Okay, I thought John included that. John, did you include that?
I did not put the expense on the applicant.
That was my understanding, both as to the
I
motion
said they would cooperate with the adjoining neighbors
Well, John, in this case, an applicant that wants something assumes hey, look, it's an additional 200 feet on either side.
John?
I have to ask Mr. Stiers a cost question on that.
No, the application is done.
Public close up.
Then take my motion away, Chicky, and you make the motion.
Wait a minute.
Can we do that, Mark?
Yeah, we could.
Anyway.
The motion can be withdrawn if the person who seconded it agrees to do that.
John, be patient.
All right.
And that was.
I'll keep my motion. And then we'll add if the applicant cooperates with the other neighbors. And if a solution.
Yeah, I mean, it's up to the neighbors, John. It's
I think
not.
the word
All right, let
chooses,
me finish my motion.
John, put the word chooses in there.
What was that, Bill?
Put the word chooses in there. It shouldn't be part.
Ultimately, if I don't misunderstand the situation, the question is whether the applicant should be asked to cooperate with the neighbors or
Right.
whether the applicant should be asked to pay for the improvement in front of the adjoining properties if the adjoining property owners agree. I mean, that's the question. I'm not suggesting what the answer to that should be.
I don't think that should be in there, but that's just my personal opinion.
Okay, so I'm a little confused here. Not, don't go away.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, let me suggest a way to resolve this. If somebody chose to make a motion to amend the motion on the floor with that additional condition, then the board could simply take a vote on that. And then however that vote turns out, then the underlying motion with or without that change would get voted on.
Say that again.
So we could vote on Chicky's suggestion, and if it's a yes, or say it's a no, then we leave it out of my original motion.
And if it's a yes, it would be included in the motion
Okay.
because your motion would be amended.
Okay, so, okay, and you know what, I'm open to what the board feels, but I'll make a motion to amend the motion. And if that gets the board to vote on that, whether they agree that the expense should be paid by the applicant, the board votes no, then I go back to John's motion. Is that correct?
That will require a second. If there is a second, then the board can vote separately on that issue. Regardless of the outcome of that, then it's back to Mr. Stamler's motion with or without the change.
Okay, so I just have a question for John. So neighbors on either side, they agreed to give up their 10 feet of property, right? So that's their contribution to this deal. And then somebody has to pay for paving those two sections. Are you suggesting that?
We can't come up with that solution now, Frank. All I wanted to state in the motion was if they pursue widening the highway, that they would cooperate with those neighbors to get it done. We can't figure out how it's going to be done and how it's going to be paid and, the budget and all. We can't do that here.
Could we vote on Chicky's motion, please?
John, it seems like the applicant's already done that, right? Aren't they already going to be widening the property?
I second Chicky's motion. I second Chicky's motion.
Mr. Chairman, you now have, unless there's specific discussion on that, you have a motion to amend the motion to approve, and would be appropriate, again, as long as there's no further discussion on that, to take a vote.
Okay, and the motion is that the applicant pay for the paving, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
only that.
It is my understanding it is only the question of whether the applicant would be obliged to pay if the property owners provide the right of way.
Okay, and do I hear a second? Did somebody second?
I second it. Yep.
Mr. Stamler seconded.
Okay, Mike, roll call, please.
Mr. Walmacher,
No.
Mr. Valchek,
No.
Ms. Lilly,
No.
Mr. Sirachi,
Yes.
Vice Chair Haynes,
Yes.
and I'm sorry, Mr. Stamler
No.
and Chair Herbert.
Yes. So what was the vote?
One, two,
It went down.
four. It was 4-3.
4-3.
Against.
Yes, okay, so,
Okay, so the original, Mr. Stamler's original motion stands.
okay. So we're finished discussing that. So at this point, we need to take a roll call vote on that.
Mr. Walmacher,
No.
Mr. Valchek,
Yes.
Ms. Salili,
Yes.
Mr. Sirachi,
No.
Mr. Sandler,
Yes,
Vice Chair Haynes,
Yes,
Chair Herbert,
Yes,
5-2.
The motion has received the minimum necessary number of votes, 5 affirmative votes. So the motion carries.
well, welcome to Hillsborough Harvest Church, and good luck, and hopefully we have peace.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
good luck.
Good luck. Okay. So we're gonna, next meeting is going to be on June 2nd.
Correct, correct, Mr. Chairman. I'll look back at things tomorrow with the schedule and give you and Chicky a more exact thing now that we have McDonald's more of a in play at this point. There may be something more that we can do, and I'll be happy to look at it.
Okay.
Hey, can we talked about the June meetings. What do we, July, what meeting? We have July 7th scheduled?
July 7th, leave is fairly open at this point too. But just keep in mind that we do have a number of applications that were deemed incomplete that we're going to get plans in for soon.
We might want to, do we want to discuss maybe having a second meeting scheduled for July, because August we're on break, right?
We could, or we can save that for the June 2nd meeting.
Okay.
Yeah, I should have some more plans that are coming in over the next week. For one, a couple of the applications that are a little bit more involved with the site plan, just to give you a heads up.
Okay, great.
Okay, so do I hear a motion to adjourn this meeting?
Motion to close.
Second? Good evening, everybody, and
Thank you, everyone, for your effort tonight.